His background is state sovereignty and international law. Then I had 3 political science professors. Neil Milner, law and judicial behavior, John Wilson, sovereignty, and Katharina Heyer, public law. Only had 1 Native Hawaiian on my doctoral committee, and that was Dr. Kanalu Young from Hawaiian Studies. Kanalu passed away before I could defend, and he was replaced by John Osorio. Okay. So you might say I had 5 Haulis and 1 Hawaiian, and I'm defending my dissertation. I'm saying Hawaii is not part of the United States. And getting your PhD, you don't get graded. It's either pass or fail. Their job is to break your research, right? That's why what you do is you don't argue your dissertation. What you do is you defend it. Their job is to poke holes in it. And trust me, Avi Soifer was trying to poke holes in it, which is what he's supposed to do, and that's why I asked him to be on there, as well as all the rest of them, right? So at the end, I could hear from them. They said, Keanu, how do we fix the problem? I said, well, I'm glad you asked how do you fix the problem, because in the beginning, you didn't think we had a problem until you actually saw it. And I said, how we begin to right the wrong is called education. That's the bottom line. It's not joining a group, not being a part of the sovereignty movement. It's called getting educated. So before you learn in the military how to fire an M16, you have to learn how to break down that M16. You got to do qualifications at 0, that M16, before you start firing it, right? A lot of times it's very tempting. People just want to pick it up and start shooting. No, put it down. Keep the weapon pointed downrange and step back. This information that I'm going to be sharing with you is very hard-hitting. So this information is very hard-hitting, but it's okay. Okay, so you guys can hang with me, right? Follow me as we go through this. What we're going to be doing is I'm going to have to teach you what is international law before you can understand what's going on. You might say very simply, we've been playing a football game using baseball rules. It's really that simple. Once you apply football rules, the game makes perfect sense. Now you think about what Queen Liliuokalani did, you're going, oh yeah, now I know why she did what she did. Now I know Joseph Navahi said what he said, which you're going to see, right? That's very important. In the academic world, it's called theoretical framework. That's all it is. And people today, when we're using the baseball rules, these rules that we've been using are terms such as colonization, indigenous people, right? That's all wrong. We're supposed to be talking about state sovereignty, independence, nationality, citizenship. Those are the issues, right? So that's what I'm going to do today, is to take you down that path. And like my cousin in the movie Matrix, you guys are about to take the red pill, okay? Okay, an uncomfortable truth. Hawaii in a state of war, okay? So, let's first start off with the Hawaiian Kingdom. The Hawaiian Kingdom actually started, or was formed, actually in 1810, right? But people kind of misconstrue the term Hawaiian Kingdom and the Kingdom of Hawaii. The Kingdom of Hawaii was actually a kingdom of Hawaii Island, who Kamehameha was the head who succeeded Ki Vala'o before him, Kalaniʻapuʻu. And then you had the Kingdom of Maui, right? And then you had the Kingdom of Kauai, okay? Prior to that, you also had the Kingdom of Oahu on the Kahahana. Then before that, you even had the Kingdom of Molokai, right? So you had these separate kingdoms based over each island. It was Kamehameha that consolidated these kingdoms into one called the Kingdom of the Sandwich Islands. At that time, he named it. And later changed to the Kingdom of the Hawaiian Islands, or what we know today as the Hawaiian Kingdom. Now Kamehameha, a lot of people don't know, in 1794, he joined the British Empire. Yeah, he joined the British. Now the term British, again, another term that we got to get used to, is not an ethnicity, it's a nationality, right? So whenever you say nationality, nationality refers to some geographical location. Ethnicity refers to some cultural component of a particular people, right? A nation of people, okay? So when you say British, it refers to Britain, the island, Great Britain, right? When you say Chinese, you refer to China, right? But in China, you have a nation of people there called Mandarin, right? In Great Britain, which is British, you have a nation there called Scottish, Welsh, English. That's ethnic, okay? But they all, if they're in Britain, are British. Does that make sense? So when Kamehameha joined the British Empire in 1794 in an agreement between Captain Vancouver and himself and his chiefs, he basically joined the British Empire. He was British. In fact, he referred to himself as British, right? But he was still Kanaka, and he was still Hawaiian, because he was still the king of Hawaii, the kingdom of Hawaii. Now, some people might say, oh, but it's a British colony. No, actually, it's part of the British Empire. Because if you're a British colony, what that means is you don't have a government there. You have what is called a governor general sent there representing the British, and they run it. So like in New Zealand, you have a governor general, right? In Canada, you have a governor general. That's an indication that was a colony, okay? In Hawaii, 1794, we joined the British Empire. So all Kamehameha had above him was King George III. Does that make sense? You guys following me with football rules? Okay. Now, the Hawaiian Kingdom, this flag was ordered to be created by Kamehameha I. And you notice the Union Jack in the flag, right? Now, that Union Jack represented Hawaii as being a part of the British Empire. So if you look at the Fijian flag, you have the Union Jack, because Fiji used to be a colony of the British Empire. If you look at New Zealand, you got the Union Jack there, right? Also in Australia, okay? So Hawaii was actually British, and that's proof positive. We were British. We weren't English, we weren't Welsh, we weren't Scottish, we were British. Okay. Now, Hawaii became an independent state. It separated itself from Great Britain, from the British Empire. So as Kamehameha I was under King George III, Kamehameha III in 1843 was under Queen Victoria, right? So Queen Victoria is the successor of King George III. And through the efforts of three individuals, Timoteo Ha'alilio, William Richards, and Sir George Simpson, Hawaii was able to get recognized as an independent state from Great Britain. So we're going to secede from the British, right? So this is the Anglo-French Proclamation. So both the British and the French sign it. This is Lord Aberdeen, Foreign Minister of Great Britain, Saint Olier, who is French, the French ambassador. And it says here that both foreign nations have thought it right to engage reciprocally to consider the Sandwich Islands, or the Hawaiian Islands, as an independent state, and never to take possession either directly or under the title of protectorate or under any other form of any part of the territory of which they are composed. Independent state, very specific. Now, the term independent is an important term that you gotta understand as well when we're playing football. Because you can be a state and not be independent, right? Like the state of New York. State of New York is not an independent state. It's a state within the United States. It's a federation, okay? It's the United States that is independent. But did you know New York used to be independent? From 1783 to 1789. When King George III surrendered, the revolution was successful. He recognized the 13 former colonies, which included New York, as 13 independent states in a confederation, which is a loose union, right? So for 6 years, New York was independent. Now, what does that word independent mean? Because it is the cornerstone of international law. Independent means it's political. What it means is your laws exist over your territory independent of other laws over other territories. Make sense? So when New York was independent from 1783 to 1789, you only had one law over New York territory passed by the New York legislature. That's called New York law. Okay? And New York could not apply its laws in Georgia, which was another independent state, okay? Or Pennsylvania, or in Great Britain or France for that fact, right? Because only New York law applied over New York territory. That's what independent means, okay? Now, 1789, the 13 former colonies as 13 independent states gave up their independence into a union where it became a federation. Okay? And once it became a federation, now they created what is called a national government at the top and the states below it. So New York remained a state, but it wasn't independent anymore. The reason is because more than New York law applied over New York territory. And what law applied over New York territory after 1789? Congressional law, passed by Congress in Washington, D.C. Right? So what you have is a duality of laws. That means New York is not independent. There's more than one law applied within that territory. That's what independent means. So when Hawaii was recognized as an independent state, Great Britain and France recognized that only Hawaiian Kingdom law applied over Hawaiian territory, not British law and not French law. And any British subject or French citizen coming into Hawaii, they were subject to Hawaiian Kingdom law, passed by its legislature, adjudicated by its courts, identified as policies of the government, whatever the case may have been. Okay? So, crucial, this date, 1843, November 28th. And that day, November 28th, in the kingdom, was a national holiday. Notice I said is a national holiday. And it's called La Kuokoa. La Kuokoa, Independence Day. That's what it's referring to. Okay? There's some people today that misuse the word independence. They think independence we got to go get. It's called an independence movement, the sovereignty movement. Hey, it already happened. So basically, Queen Victoria recognized Hawaii's separation. What we got is what America got without violence, which is the revolution. And that's important, right? And by 1893, the Hawaiian Kingdom manned over 90 embassies and consulates all over the world. And right there you see, top left, Hawaiian legation. Legation is another word for embassy, Washington, D.C. We have a Hawaiian legation, Hawaiian embassy in London. There's a Hawaiian embassy in Amsterdam. Hawaiian legation or embassy in France, right? So that's indicative of the fact that these countries acknowledge the Hawaiian Kingdom's independence and had diplomatic relations. That's very important. Okay. Now in 2001, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in the Netherlands, which is a world court, international court, you folks may have heard of the recent case that caught a lot of attention, the South China Sea case, where China's building islands in the middle of the South China Sea. That arbitration was at the Permanent Court of Arbitration, was Philippines versus China, okay? Well, there was a case regarding Hawaii in 2001 at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. And the court acknowledged that in the 19th century, the Hawaiian Kingdom existed as an independent state. So you see, in 2001, they brought what was already there, historical, and made it contemporary, legally. Okay? And it was recognized as such by the United States, Great Britain, and various other states, which are countries. Now, when it says recognized by the United States and Great Britain, what that means is, from a legal standpoint, it's saying that the United States recognized that only Hawaiian Kingdom law applied over Hawaiian territory. So when American citizens come into Hawaii, they're under Hawaiian law. And when Hawaiian subjects travel to America, they're under American law. Okay? Independence, that's what it means. In 1893, did you know there were only 44 independent states? Only 44. You ever heard of that phrase, the sun never sets on the British Empire? Yeah? Because they have a lot of colonial territory, right? Well, by 1945, Great Britain began to decolonize a lot of its territories. So did France. So did the Dutch, yeah? Regarding Indonesia and so forth. So from 44 independent states, which included the Hawaiian Kingdom, only 44, 1945, there were only 46. But by today, we have 197. 193 members of the UN, but it also includes the Cook Islands. Rarotonga is actually an independent state, but it's in a, a confederation with New Zealand. Yeah? So that's one example, and a few others. Because you can be an independent state and not be a member of the United Nations. In fact, Switzerland did not join the United Nations until, I believe, 2002. They were outside of the United Nations. So some people tend to confuse the United Nations with the Family of Nations. No, the Family of Nations consider it like it's a pedigree called Rottweilers, right? And amongst these Rottweilers, they form clubs, right? You got NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. You got United Nations, right? You got Universal Postal Union. Those are organizations of independent states. That is not the family of nations. But members of the family of nations are part of these clubs. Make sense? Okay. So, because Hawaii is an independent state, we're actually part of international law. And literally, international law is defined as inter, which is between, national law, which is nations. So international law is literally the law between nations, not above nations. You don't have a legislature up there making rules, right? What you have is laws made between nations, international, which are treaties, which is custom, which is principles, all these things. The United Nations is not a law-making body when they pass a resolution. When the United Nations members pass a resolution, all they're doing is taking a position. That's what a resolution is, a position statement. And those position statements are not binding on the countries that approved it unless that resolution is tied directly to international law, right? Then it's binding. Okay? So just wanted to make sure that you folks kind of get that. Now, William Edward Hall, a renowned English jurist, says international law consists in certain rules of conduct which modern civilized states regard as being binding on them in their relations with one another with a force comparable in nature and degree to that binding the conscientious person to obey the laws of his country, and which they also regard as being enforceable by appropriate means in case of infringement. International law and international relations are very different from the laws within a country, right? If your rights are violated in a country, you normally call the cops. At the international level, who you call, right? So countries not only make laws, they also enforce laws. And they've established entities at the international level that can serve as enforcement measures, such as Security Council and many other forums, right? And that is what we call in political science, IR, international relations. So Professor Christopher Greenwood, former judge on the International Court of Justice, he says traditional international law was based upon a rigid distinction between the state of peace and the state of war. Because under international law, war is legal. Remember when you infringe international law? Guess what? You don't call the cops. The country goes after you. They send in the Marines. And then you have an engagement, right? Well, that engagement where countries become judge, jury, and executioner is actually regulated by international law. It's not promoted. They don't promote war, but they recognize the fact that countries do go to war, right? And there are certain rules of conduct that have to take place. Okay. Then it goes on to say countries were either in a state of peace or in a state of war. There was no intermediate state. It's like being hapai, right? You either hapai or you're not hapai. You're not almost hapai, right? You're either at peace or you're at war. The question here then is what triggers war, right? Well, what triggers war is between us two states, acts of hostility, one against the other. And that act or acts of hostility is termed acts of war. You guys may have heard that, the term act of war. Okay, that's a heavy word. Once a country says it, what they're basically doing is they're going from state of peace into a state of war. Now, Oppenheim, who is one of the leading jurists, authorities of international law, he actually has 2 volumes of international law. Volume 1, peace. Volume 2, war and neutrality. Now, what's interesting is Hawaii was a recognized neutral state. It's in our treaties. Hawaii was one of 4 neutral countries explicitly recognized by the international community in 1893. Belgium, Luxembourg, Switzerland, the Hawaiian Kingdom. A lot of people didn't know that. And in the treaties, it says Hawaiian neutrality. The only time neutrality kicks in is when there's war breaking out. And because Hawaii was in the middle of the Pacific, you would have naval battles. So Kamehameha III ensured that Hawaii would not only be recognized as being independent, but also recognized as a neutral territory, like Switzerland, Belgium, and Luxembourg. What that means is we don't fight, but our territory is open for those that are warring against each other legally, and they need to come into a harbor. What they would have to do is disarm, come into Hawaiian territory, which is 3 miles out off the coast, refurbish, leave us, our territory, rearm, and go back fighting. So Hawaii, or neutrality, very similar to Ho'onaunau, city of refuge. That's why Hawaiians could actually understand these ideas, because actually war in Hawaii was legal under Kukailimoku. The only time it wasn't legal was when Lono was here, called Makahiki. So Hawaii understood that. So it's almost as if we were running a parallel society with medieval Europe, yeah, which is quite amazing, and it's actually the subject of a lot of research right now. Okay. So, according to Professor Greenwood, once in a state of war, the law of peace ceased to apply between the two states, and their relations with one another became subject to the laws of war, while the relations with other states not parties to the conflict became governed by neutrality. And Professor Venturini, she says, if an armed conflict occurs, the law of armed conflict, the laws of war, must be applied from the beginning until the end, when the law of peace resumes in full effect. Okay? Now, when do you move from a state of war to a state of peace? That's not an arbitrary decision, but rather it has to be a mutual understanding between the two warring factions. Not one side can declare peace. They both have to agree. And how you agree is called a treaty, called a treaty of peace. That's what you got to do. A treaty of peace follows an act of war. But there are certain stages within a state of war. So here's the example. United States and Japan, 1941. On December 7, 1941, Japanese troops attacked the U.S. military here in Hawaii. Okay? Everybody knows that. President Roosevelt said that hostility or act committed by the Japanese was an act of war. President Roosevelt initiated state of war. Okay? Now some people might say, yeah, but the United States Congress has to declare war. Nope. Actually, December 8th, the day after the hostilities, Congress passed a resolution, joint resolution declaring war against Japan. Well, that came to a test because there was a guy named Captain Banyan. He was a naval officer that died in Pearl Harbor. He had life insurance, but there was a condition on his life insurance. It was not covered during war. So if he died during war, the insurance didn't cover. So in New York life insurance versus Banyan, the Banyan family were claiming war didn't start until after December 7th, which was December 8th, the joint resolution of declaring war against Japan. The federal judge says no. When President Roosevelt said act of war, it started December 7th. So the Banyan family lost. Okay? The judge said that the declaration of war was merely a formality. It wasn't a prerequisite. Make sense? We're talking football now. You guys following me? Okay. And football, people get hurt. So, let's go back to 1893 and what happened. And it's not going to be me trying to interpret and tell you what happened. Let the players tell you what happened. More importantly, let the Queen tell you and let the President tell you. Because in international relations, they are the ones called heads of state that represents each country. The Congress does not represent the United States in international relations, nor do the courts. It's the President of the United States called the executive officer. And Queen Liliuokalani, she represented the Hawaiian Kingdom, not the judiciary, not the legislature. She was called the executive monarch, or it was a constitutional system. So, President Cleveland's message to Congress on December 18, 1893, 11 months after the takeover, because he did an investigation, and he's telling the Congress, this is what I found. On the 16th day of January, 1893, between 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, a detachment of Marines from the United States steamer Boston, USS Boston, with 2 pieces of artillery, landed at Honolulu. The men, upwards of 160 in all, were supplied with double cartridge belts filled with ammunition and with haversacks and canteens, and were accompanied by a hospital corps with stretchers and medical supplies. You think they landed to roast marshmallows in Waikiki? That pretty much looks like hostility, huh? Now imagine, that right there, that narrative happened right across the street, up Mililani Street. So you have Ali'i Hale, where the Supreme Court is. Okay. To the right of Ali'i Hale, you got the post office. Okay, that building there used to be Music Hall. Right behind Music Hall was Arian Hall. Okay, not Aryan race, but Arian. And right between Arian Hall and Music Hall were these Marines. So I'm in Iolani Palace, I can see them. Especially and they got Gatling guns too. Okay? Now President Cleveland investigated to find out what exactly happened. So that pretty much here looks like an act of hostility. Well, what does President Cleveland say? This military demonstration upon the soil of Honolulu was of itself an act of war. He just triggered it. Just like President Roosevelt triggered it on December 7th, right? And then, January 17th, Queen Lili'uokalani, this is her surrender. It's not a treaty of peace, it's a ceasing of hostilities, right? She says, I, Lili'uokalani, by the grace of God and under the Constitution of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Okay, let me just point this out. Notice she says Hawaiian Kingdom, yeah? She didn't say Kingdom of Hawaii. I hear a lot of people today saying Kingdom of Hawaii. We got to stop that. Because that was during the days of Kivala'o, Kalani'opu'u, and for a short time, Kamehameha. It's actually the Hawaiian Kingdom. So I, Lili'uokalani, by the grace of God and under the Constitution, not above it, under the Constitution of the Hawaiian Kingdom, do hereby solemnly protest against any and all acts done against myself as the constitutional government of the Hawaiian Kingdom by certain persons claiming to have established a provisional government of and for this kingdom. A provisional government is a temporary government, right? Temporary. She continues that I yield to the superior force of the United States, whose minister plenipotentiary, it's another word for ambassador, His Excellency John Stevens, has caused United States troops to be landed at Honolulu and declared that he would support the provisional government. So she's making the record. She's talking football. She's not giving up Hawaii. She's yielding her authority. She's not surrendering. She's not signing a treaty of peace giving Hawaii to the United States. But why is she yielding her authority? Because remember, when you come into a country, you are subject to Hawaiian law, right? Remember, because Hawaii is independent. What she's basically doing is setting it up for the United States president to send somebody over to do an investigation. Meaning, I'm authorizing you to come in my territory, right? So that it won't be another act of war. So she continues to say, now to avoid any collision of armed forces and perhaps the loss of life, I do this under protest and impelled by said force, yield my authority until such a time as the government of the United States shall, upon the facts being presented to it, undo the action of its representatives and reinstate me in the authority which I claim as the constitutional sovereign of the Hawaiian Islands. That's very important to know and understand because she knows how the game is played. But she's also dealing with a powder cake that could blow. And a lot of people will be dead, right? So for the Queen to know what she's doing is indicative that she's politically astute and legally mindful of what's happening. And I can tell you right now, I'm glad Wahine was in control. If you had a guy back there, hey, take them on. Yeah, hey, Hawaiian, take it easy. You got Marines going to keep coming. Yeah? Because you know what? President Cleveland admitted these Marines would have been taken out by us. But you got more coming. The Queen knew that. But local brothers, they like play tantarana. And the word tantaran is not Filipino. Dinaguan, right? Tantaran is a local term that applies to people trying to play Superman. Dun, da, da. You guys knew that, right? So when locals say dun, da, da, hey, Hawaiian, don't play Superman. And I got to crack jokes as we go through this because it is pretty serious, but it's okay because our kupuna made right decisions. It's up to us to make right decisions, but our decisions have to be informed. That's why education, right? Now, President Cleveland further states to Congress, this wrongful recognition by our minister, the ambassador, placed the government of the Queen in a position of most perilous perplexity. On the one hand, she had the possession of the palace, the barracks, and of the police station, and at her command at least 500 fully armed men, several pieces of artillery. The Marines were about 160 total. We had 500. Indeed, the whole military force of her kingdom was on her side and at her disposal. In this state of things, if the Queen could have dealt with the insurgents alone, her recourse would have been plain and the result unmistakable. That speaks to what we had and why the Queen was, hey, slow down. Let's take a look at this situation. But what I like about what President Cleveland is saying, you know those guys like Sanford Dole, Lauren Thurston, they're not pillars of Hawaii society. Businessmen. Yeah, that's what they say, huh? Businessmen overthrew. Businessmen, they didn't even have weapons. They were cowards. Yeah, that's who they were cowards. And I'm saying that from a military standpoint. I would have more respect for Sanford Dole if he had a weapon. Shot dead, then I know he was an insurgent. But what President Cleveland clearly articulated, they weren't businessmen. They're traitors. Insurgents. See, we use the word insurgents today, right? Insurgents are traitors. That's in 1893. So we got to stop calling these people businessmen. They were insurgents, not their family, not their sons or their children or their wives, them. Like if my dad gets into trouble and commits a crime, don't blame me. Hold my dad accountable, prosecute him. Right? So I'm not blaming the Dole family, but I'm calling Sanford. He's a traitor. Lauren Thurston, traitor. Right? Now these terms that we're using, coming from President Cleveland, coming from the Queen, are terms that are used in a state of war. Insurgency, act of war, artillery. Then President Cleveland continues with, but the United States had allied itself with her enemies, had recognized them as the true government of Hawaii, and had put her and her adherents in the position of opposition against lawful authority, the United States. She knew that she could not withstand the power of the United States, but she believed that she might safely trust to its justice. Then President Cleveland concluded, by an act of war, the government of a friendly and confiding people has been overthrown. That's pretty much war, right? Now, in order for a state of peace to come about, you need a treaty of peace. So remember, we talked about Japan. Act of war, December 7, 1941. Treaty of surrender, like the Queen's surrender, by Japan, 1945. From 1945 to 1952 in Japan, Japan was occupied by the United States military, headed by General MacArthur. In 1952, a treaty of peace came into effect that was signed in San Francisco. From 1952 is when the occupation ended and it went back to a state of peace. So what you have there is an example of how long a state of war took in the case of Japan. Some people thought when they stopped fighting, that was the end of the war. No, you need a treaty of peace. Now today, you have that same discussion. Korea. You guys watching CNN? Trump? Singapore? What are the reporters asking Trump? Are you going to sign a treaty of peace? Did you know that Korea is still in a state of war? All you have in the 1956? 1953? 1950s. You had an armistice that established a 38 parallel. That armistice is basically ceasing hostilities. It didn't end the war. It's still going on. And you need to have a treaty of peace signed by the states that were participating in that war. China, North Korea, South Korea, United States. That's what you're hearing right now. So if you go to South Korea, you go to Seoul, it definitely doesn't look like war zone, right? I was actually part of a military exercise when I was in the military called Team Spirit back in the late 80s. Yeah, we were actually training as if possible invasion by North Korea. And they're still doing that every year. And they're talking about those exercises. Yeah, Trump is saying, hey, we're putting them off. That's still a state of war. So I just wanted to give you the idea that because it doesn't look like war, that doesn't mean it's not war, legally. Right? Make sense? Okay. And right now we have no treaty of peace. President Cleveland tried to negotiate with the Queen to establish a treaty of peace called an executive agreement where it should be reinstated. But U.S. Congress said no. They want Pearl Harbor. That was the whole reason why they staged this whole thing. Set up U.S. military bases in Hawaii. That was what was going on in the reason in 1893. So, military showed up. And something happened between then and now. How come we don't know this? Right? Now let me just give you a sense of context. When I talk about the Hawaiian Kingdom, right, I'm talking about a country. I'm not talking about a sovereignty group. A country called the Hawaiian Kingdom. And my tutu's parents, right, my grandparents' generation, their parents were born in the kingdom. Yeah, my great-grandfather was born in Napo'opo, William Kuakini Somerset. 1880, he was 13 years old when everything hit the fan. See, the Hawaiian Kingdom is not a distant past, right? I'm not talking about the 1400s Umi Aliloa. Yeah? I'm talking right around the corner. How is it that such a short span of time of 3 generations, my memory has been obliterated? I don't know nothing about the kingdom. Nothing. In fact, I went to a military college. I didn't know. Well, there's a reason. And it's not ethnic. It's not throwing mud at race. No. You're going to find out it was actually policy. Right? So that's coming up. But what's most important in international law, an independent state is separate from its government. That's what's important. And that also plays into the laws of war and occupation. So Hawaii, an independent state in 1843. You have a government that was a constitutional system, Queen Lili'uokalani. In international relations, you separate government from state. Because you can overthrow a government without overthrowing the state. Just like Iraq, 2003, Saddam Hussein's government was overthrown, but that did not mean the Iraqi state was overthrown. What you call that situation is occupation. Even when there's no Iraqi government there, it's called occupation. And international law regulates that. It's called the law of occupation. The term is jus in bello, it's a Latin word, the rules of war. So, how then did Hawaii become part of the United States? Right? So let's kind of touch on that. Well, according to Professor Oppenheim, leading expert in international law, cession, to cede, right? Cession. Secession, break away. Cede or cession, to join. Cession of state territory is the transfer of sovereignty over state territory by the owner state to another state. And the only form in which a cession can be effected is an agreement embodied in a treaty between the ceding and the acquiring state. So here you have 2 sovereign entities, 2 sovereign states, each with its own government. One government will cede its territory to another government. It has to be a treaty. Could be a voluntary cession. They negotiate. I'll convey so much of this land to you. Or it could be conquest. But you still need a treaty of conquest. Or a treaty of peace that includes the transfer, right? Because remember, international law are treaties. It's agreements. It's not one side. If it's one side, it's not an agreement, therefore it's illegal. Let's take a look at ceded lands of the United States. The 13 colonies of the United States that became 13 independent states are only right here. How did America get all of that? Cession. Ceded lands. First one, 1803, Louisiana Purchase. America paid $14.5 million for that. So I believe it was Napoleon that ceded that territory to America, and they received it. So all lands west of the Mississippi River, formerly French, became American. Okay. Spanish Treaty, 1819. Florida, they used to be Spanish. Right? Pacific Northwest, 1846. Oregon, Idaho, Washington, used to be British. Then 1848, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas. New Mexico, that territory used to be Mexican territory. And then transferred. I think it was $14.5 million too. So even when you conquer them, you got to pay for it. Right? And then up north, up here, you got Alaska, 1867, from Russia. So what you have there are ceded lands, so we have treaties. So that's how the United States acquired these territories, from other states through treaties. Well, in 1898, you have a joint resolution passed by Congress. Joint resolution to provide for annexing the Hawaiian Islands to the United States. Wait, joint resolution? That's not a treaty. That's a U.S. law. Remember we talked about independence. Can American law be applied in Hawaiian territory? Because of independence, not because of it can't, because of independence. And Hawaiian law cannot be applied in the United States. Both are independent. They got their own lawmaking bodies. Well, these guys just went ahead and made a law, which obviously isn't a treaty, right? It's a congressional law. Now, in 1898, the public record of Congress, very illuminating. I'm just taking two samples. There's a lot of them. Representative Thomas Ball from Texas. He says the annexation of Hawaii by joint resolution is unconstitutional, unnecessary, and unwise. That territory could only be constitutionally acquired by a treaty. Hey, he knows how to play football. Senator Augustus Bacon from Georgia says the annexation of foreign territory was necessarily and essentially the subject matter of a treaty, and that it could not be accomplished legally and constitutionally by a statute or a joint resolution. So how can the United States have annexed Hawaii by passing a law? Answer is, it didn't. Because U.S. laws have no effect in Hawaii, just as U.S. laws have no effect in Canada. It ends at its borders. Now, what does the U.S. Supreme Court say about this? So it's not like, hey, Dr. Sai said, right? I'm just a political scientist pointing to how the game is played. In 1824, the United States Supreme Court said the laws of no nation can justly extend beyond its own territories. They can have no force to control the sovereignty of any other nation because of independence, right? That's how it works. And in 1936, the U.S. Supreme Court affirmed the same position and said, neither the Constitution, the federal Constitution, nor the laws passed in pursuant of it, like congressional laws, have any force in foreign territory. And operations of the nation in such territory must be governed by treaties, international understandings and compacts, and the principles of international law. Hey, football. You know what we've been playing, huh? U.S. Constitution. It's called baseball. But you're assuming Hawaii's a part of the United States. And I'm not talking about breaking away from the United States. I'm not into that. I'm not into treason under U.S. law. I was in the Army, right? I don't believe in sedition, right? But my point is, we're never part of the United States to begin with, so I'm not even talking about sedition, right? So I'm not trying to divorce from the United States. I'm just saying we was never married. Bottom line, show me the marriage papers. There is none. It's more like a shotgun wedding with a joint resolution. I got you. Okay. But legally speaking, Hawaii is not part of the United States. Can you guys see that? Can you see how easy my doctoral dissertation was? Yeah, you just got to point to facts and let it speak for itself. No, I'm not saying, hey, don't blame me. Don't shoot the messenger. Just read the mail. Don't shoot the mailman. Don't launch pit bulls after the mailman, right? Open your letters. Everybody's opening their letters now from 1893. Little visual, there's Washington, D.C., U.S. Congress, you got borders. U.S. laws have no effect beyond its borders, period. It's not an argument. That's just the way it is. That's poli-sci 130, Intro to American Politics. If you guys come to UH, you'll learn that. And then in 1988, how's this, 1988, 90 years later, the U.S. Department of Justice stumbles over it. Yeah, it's not like they wanted to look at it. They actually found it. And they write, despite the constitutional objections from Thomas Ball and Senator Bacon, Congress approved the joint resolution and President McKinley signed the measure in 1898. It's a law. Nevertheless, whether this action demonstrates the constitutional power of Congress to acquire territory is certainly questionable. That's DOJ, Washington, D.C. going, OMG, WTF. Then they conclude it is therefore unclear which constitutional power Congress exercised when it acquired Hawaii by a joint resolution. Oh yeah, you got it. It didn't. But how come we thought it did? Because right now it sounds so logical, yeah? How come we didn't notice? There's a reason. So let me distinguish between what is called national law, which is within a country, and international law, which is between countries. So there's the United States, an independent state, there's the Hawaiian Kingdom. U.S. passed a law by Congress, joint resolution of annexation. That law is limited to U.S. territory. It has nothing to do with Hawaii. 1900, the United States passed a law called the Organic Act. They actually named the lead insurgent. You know that guy, Sanford Dole, the traitor? Because he was actually Hawaiian. He wasn't American. He was not American. He was a Hawaiian subject. But he was Haole. Hawaiian is a nationality. You can be Chinese and be Hawaiian. That's how it was back then. We use the word wrong today because that's an American creation. Native Hawaiians. Who's more Hawaiian than Hawaiian? Now we got 200% Hawaiians. Hawaiians trying to prove they're Hawaiian. They're Hawaiian. Take it easy. Hawaiian is a nationality. It's not ethnicity. So stop doing a ku e, a ku mau mau, a ku hulu hulu i kala navau. Joke, joke. It's only when Hawaii can tease one out of Hawaiian. But I'm also Haole. Reeves from Tennessee, Sparta, Tennessee. 1959, the United States Congress passed another law called the State of Hawaii, changing the name from the territory. And then in 1993, they passed a law apologizing. Oh, sorry. Sorry for illegally overthrowing the Hawaiian Kingdom. They weren't saying sorry for overthrowing the government. Yeah, they say sorry for overthrowing, not the Hawaiian Kingdom, they say the Kingdom of Hawaii. Hey, Kingdom of Hawaii, that was before 1810. They even had the terms wrong. Who was the legal counsel looking at this joint resolution? But in that joint resolution is the source of much confusion. Start identifying Native Hawaiians as indigenous people. Colonization, self-determination. Baseball. You're talking baseball. And then Native Hawaiians are trying to prove they're in a tribe. And then they want to try to get recognized by the federal government. It's all baseball within the United States. It has nothing to do with Hawaii. Isn't that such a different language than what I showed you in 1893, coming from the US president? President Clinton, in the apology resolution, he says Native Hawaiians have the right to self-determination. Then you got Native Hawaiians, natives, today saying I got a right to self-determination, not even knowing what self-determination means. Self-determination means to choose to become an independent state, or choose to become totally incorporated, or choose to become in free association like the Federated States of Micronesia. That has nothing to do if Hawaii is already an independent state and by an act of war, the government of a friendly and confiding people has been overthrown. that's hogwash. But it's all part of the misdirection, right? It's all because we don't speak football. And in order to speak football, you got to be immersed in football. It's like immersion. Yeah. In order to really understand Hawaiian, you got to be immersed in Hawaiian. What we tend to do is sometimes we hear football words and we use it with baseball words. And I hear it all the time. Yeah. We have to be careful how we say things and stop blaming the haole for everything. Okay? Because it wasn't the haoles. You had Hawaiians that committed high treason too. Right? So let's keep it to a national level. Not us against them, right? West versus rest, Occidental versus Oriental. Hey, take it easy. Bring it in the middle. Let's use the rule of law. Yeah? Let's not get emotional. Talk straight. See, I like my military training because I can stay focused. But I see everybody going berserk. Hey, take it easy. Get informed. Get informed. Can you see why I told my doctoral committee that the first step is education? And don't politicize the education, right? Just know it. And these are Hawaiian laws: 1864 Constitution, 1850 Criminal Code, the Penal Code, Civil Code, and the compiled laws. These laws, Hawaiian laws, have no effect in American territory, and American laws have no effect in Hawaiian territory because of international law. So if you didn't know that Hawaii was an independent state, this looks like confusion. Once you draw that line of international law, now you separate it. Because these are not international laws, these are national laws that apply to their territory. So the international laws that would apply here would be what? International laws of war, right? So international laws of occupation, the 1907 Hague Conventions and the 1949 Geneva Conventions. And these codifications of the laws of occupation and war are codifications of recognized rules as it was in 1893. Trust me, it is. Don't try to say it wasn't, because this is 1907, what happened to us in 1893. Okay? I can assure you, these laws were in place in 1893, and President Cleveland was making reference to the substance of those laws. In fact, President McKinley was also making reference in 1898 during the Spanish-American War. Much of what he was referring to, President McKinley, before 1907 and 1899 Hague Convention, was already accepted as international law. So I can assure you it was. The main thing is, we have to make sure those laws also applied in 1893, but they also applied as far back as 1870s. So, according to Lauterpacht, a renowned jurist, an illegal war. See, you can have a legal war, a just war, and you can have an unjust war. Right? That's important, because international law regulates war and says if it's an illegal war or an unjust war, you can't benefit from it. So, an illegal war is a war of aggression undertaken by one belligerent side in violation of a basic international obligation prohibiting recourse to war as an instrument of national policy. National policy. Ambassador Stevens is a representation of a national policy of President Harrison's administration. That's illegal if you intervene and set up a puppet government. And you cannot benefit from that. The only way you can benefit from that is to hide it. See, when you don't know, no problem. Once you do know, you turn on the lights, then everybody panics, because now you see stuff. You see cockroaches all over. And you say, turn off the light, turn off the light. Too late, the light's on. Maka'ala. Prior to this, was on Makapo, was blind leading the blind. Stepping on each other, cracking each other. Take it easy, homie. And in the Nuremberg trial, a hostage case, this was after World War II. Whatever may be the cause of a war that has broken out, and whether or not the cause be so-called just, the same rules of international law are valid as to what must not be done and what may be done. So now we're getting into what can you do during war and what can't you do during war. But we are definitely still in a state of war. So are you folks following me so far? Am I making sense? Yes. Okay. January 17th, 1893, the Hawaiian Kingdom came under belligerent occupation. The Hawaiian government was overthrown. The law of occupation mandates that the occupier, in this case the United States, is obligated to administer the laws of the occupied state called the Hawaiian Kingdom. That's how it works. That's football. Okay? And according to Judge Crawford of the International Court of Justice, belligerent occupation does not affect the continued existence of a state, even when there exists no government claiming to represent the occupied state. So even though our government was overthrown in 1893 illegally, our state still existed. And how I can get that to change is to take hold of the education and get it so that you don't think like that, right? It's called Americanization. So, Article 43 of the 1907 Hague Convention, number 4. This is stuff we learned in the Army. This is actually coming out of U.S. Army Field Manual 27-10. Article 43 does not confer on the occupying power any sovereignty over the occupied territory. The occupant may therefore not extend its own legislation over the occupied territory, nor act as a sovereign legislator. But that's exactly what happened since 1893. We're living under it. The expression laws enforced in the country in Article 43 refers not only to laws in the strict sense of the word, but also to the Constitution, decrees, ordinances, court precedents, as well as administrative regulations and executive orders. Basically what it's saying is the Hawaiian Kingdom still exists. You got to administer these laws until you get a treaty of peace. The problem is people today don't even know what these laws are. They tend to just say, Hawaiian Kingdom, like something's going to happen. Hey, cite me the section in the Civil Code of what's going on. Cite me the section of the Penal Code. Cite me the court precedents of the Hawaiian Kingdom Supreme Court. Kekieke versus Edward Dennis. Yeah? Kuki'ahu versus Gill. Come on, let's stop talking like that. We can't. How come? Because we don't know. We were brainwashed. We're coming up to that point. How come we don't know? Because our kupuna actually knew back then. You can read it in all the newspapers. In fact, a lot of the court cases that I just mentioned to you, Kuki'ahu versus Edward Gill, was published in the Polynesian newspaper. Yeah, people were actually up to speed with what was going on in the kingdom. Did you know by 1893, literacy in the kingdom was nearly universal? Nearly universal. That is amazing. Did you know we were second to Scotland? Now, we second, well actually, we're dead bottom. And a lot of our own people cannot read. Yeah, and they say, hey, how come I gotta read? It's the Hau'oli. Hey, Hawaiian, take it easy. It's not the Hau'oli, it's just called reading and comprehension. Okay, let's use the word in Hawaiian. It's called palapala. Palapala is called comprehension, reading and writing. Our kupuna excelled at that. How come we aren't today? But there's an answer, right? Because something happened where we became something that we're not. That's what happened. So before you can become something, you gotta know you're not something, right? Because if you still think you're something, it's hard to learn anything because you already have preconceived notions. Yeah? Oh yeah. And this is where it started. Denationalization. Denationalization. Here's a guy, he's not a businessman. This guy's Samuel Damon. He's an insurgent. Not because I said it. Who said he's an insurgent? President Cleveland, blame him. But he's an insurgent. He's a traitor. And did you know he's Hawaiian? Hey, he's Hawaiian. Even though he's Haole, he's Hawaiian subject. Okay. Well, he says if in 1895, part of the insurgency, it's actually part of the cabinet records of the so-called Republic of Hawaii, they changed their name. He says, if we're ever to have peace and annexation, the first thing to do is to obliterate the past. Whoa, that's pretty heavy. But in 1895, that's his opinion. That's not a policy. Until somebody carries that out, right? See, when you carry it out and you execute it, see, then it becomes a policy. Who's this guy, Samuel Damon? Anybody here who's a graduate of Kamehameha schools? Raise your hand. Anybody Kamehameha? Me too. Samuel Damon was one of the trustees. from 1884 to 1909. Did you know Kamehameha schools became the flagship for brainwashing? Well, it did. Businessman. It's like, whoa. Charles Reed Bishop, Founders Day. I remember that. He's a traitor. President Cleveland called him an insurgent. Actually asked the Queen if she would grant amnesty to these people. Whoa, that is not what I learned at Kamehameha. I thought these guys were the pillars of society and they had to civilize us. That's the Kamehameha schools. No, they hijacked. These insurgents did not create anything. They're criminals that hijacked a very good operating governing body. All you do is change the head. Remove the Queen and her cabinet, have the U.S. Marines protect them, and force everybody in government to sign oaths of allegiance. It's called regime change, decapitation. They did not create a new government. So when we say overthrow, it's kind of a misnomer. It's actually a regime change with U.S. military backing. Denationalization, by definition, is to obliterate the national consciousness of the occupied state. Denationalization in 1919 was determined to be a war crime because the Balkans and Romanians were actually committing denationalization during World War I. In World War II, the Germans did it, denationalization. In occupied territories, they would take the children. See, that's who you denationalize, not the adults. The adults, you put them up, you get a firing squad. Denationalization, you get the children, and you brainwash them. And what was happening was in occupied territories, in Luxembourg and so forth, and parts of France, Germans were basically taking children in schools and teaching them German history. Did you know even the Italians were doing that in Yugoslavia, called Italianization? Yeah, it's a war crime. And here, these guys are going to have control. Now, this is when that statement became a policy. Program for Patriotic Exercises, 1906. Territory of Hawaii adopted by the Department of Public Instruction. The theme of the program, basically, was to indoctrinate the children of the Hawaiian Islands to be American and to speak English. This is my tutu's generation. My tutu was born in 1910. Now, they not only did it at Kamehameha and other private schools, it was throughout the public school system. They took control because they had the ability to do it. Because in the meantime, you got the military coming, right? And it wasn't really good to be in Hawaii at that time. A lot of racial tension, a lot of military coming to Hawaii. Did you know a lot of military are actually from the South? They were bringing in prejudice. A lot of fights breaking out in Waikiki. They didn't like Beach Boys teaching white women how to surf because they came from South Carolina. No, that's what was happening back then. It led to what we now know today as the Massey case. No, it was bad stuff back then. I remember my nana, my dad's mom, when I started to understand this in the 1990s, she says, Keanu, you know what your problem is? I said, Nana, what's my problem? She says, you know too much. She says, when I grew up, the least you know, the better you are. Now that right there is a window into that time. Right in. Because you get beaten if you speak Hawaiian. And the beating is not just with native children. Chinese, Caucasian. Because you got to remember, the Hawaiian language was not the language of a bunch of natives in the corner. The Hawaiian language was the national language of the country. Everybody spoke Hawaiian. Like everybody speaks Russian in Russia, right? French in France, Italian in Italy. The same thing here. But somehow we think if you speak Hawaiian, only the natives can speak it. No, the laws were in Hawaiian, but also in English. So remember, we're talking football, yeah? And in 1907, an article came out, the Harper's Weekly magazine in 1907 from New York. They sent a reporter to Hawaii to do a story on this. And this reporter came to Hawaii and visited 3 schools. Ka'iolani Public School, Ka'ahumanu Public School, which still exists today, and Honolulu High School, before the name was changed to President William McKinley High School, part of the brainwashing. And at Ka'iolani Public School, 704 children from grades 1 through 8. And at the order and command of the principal, they all start marching. Yeah, marching cadence. And the reporter is commenting how precise they look. Like he's really impressed that children are able to do that. Yeah, if you're beaten enough, right? And they all line up in front of the American flag, 700 of them. And at the command of the principal, they salute. And that's what it looks like. And at the command of the principal, they all say, we give our heads and our hearts to God and our country. One country, one language, one flag. 1907. This scene shows a salute to the American flag, which flies in the grounds of the Kailani Public School, which has many Japanese pupils. The drill is constantly held as a means of inculcating patriotism in the hearts of the children. Inculcate. Inculcate is brainwashing through repetition. That's the word. I can't believe they actually used that word. They should have just said, to be good patriots. No, they say we're inculcating them because they're not American. And if they do speak Hawaiian, they get hit. So if I'm a parent of these children, because I'm a parent, what do? Do you pull your kid out of school? There's no charter school back then. You got to do something. So obviously it appears what they did was they didn't talk Hawaiian in front of the children. That's what happened. They didn't teach the children their history. They just said, be a good American. Be quiet. Humble. Like my nana told me, the least you know, the better you off. That's that time frame. This is why we don't know. Pretty heavy, huh? This is crazy stuff. You can make a movie of this. I mean, I was in the army. We go to war against countries that do that. And it happened in my backyard. So where Germany only lasted 4 years, 1941 to 1945, give these guys 125 years. So all of a sudden, this is my tutu's generation, brainwash. By the time it gets to my parents' generation, my dad and my mom, it's already institutionalized. By the time it gets to me at Kamehameha, out of sight, out of mind. I don't know nothing. 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 Right. Within 2 generations, the national consciousness of the Hawaiian Kingdom was obliterated and replaced through Americanization. It interfered with the methods of education. It compelled education in the English language. It banned the use of the language in the schools. It didn't ban it nationally, just in the schools. Imposed conscription upon Hawaiian nationals for U.S. wars. Conscription is drafting. Yeah, Hawaiians fought wars, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. It imposed American administrative and judicial systems, different from the Hawaiian Kingdom system. Imposed American financial and economic administration. Imposed American financial and economic administration, basically strangleholding the people. And all of a sudden, Native Hawaiians went, now we're the highest on substance abuse, spouse abuse, incarceration. That, when you compare it to the Kingdom era, night and day. We weren't that bad. Reading and writing. See, now we are the evidence of the crime. That's important to know. And the only people that you can blame are the insurgents who are dead. So you can't blame them. The only people you blame is now you. What you gonna do about it? Yeah? Education. You see where I'm going with this? That's what I was putting in my doctoral dissertation. It's not about holding signs, yeah? It's about knowing what you're talking about. There is a olelo no'ea, a Hawaiian proverb that refers to the kahu'ewai, the water gourd. And the water gourd looks like a canteen, you know, the long neck. You got the shell that's a cork, right? And it's filled with water. So the way that goes is the kahu'ewai, the water gourd, is the person. Water in the gourd is knowledge. The gourd with a little bit of water makes the most noise when you shake it. You guys got that one? Have you seen a lot of sushi? You guys say, hey uncle, go fill the gourd. Go fill the gourd, because right now it's a lot of sushi. Some, actually, there's no sushi because it's empty. He's like, you talking, Uncle, Auntie. But we didn't lose the country, right? We just lost our minds. Now we can recover because now we know where it's at. It never left. David Copperfield just came and made Diamond Head disappear. Because you know, he really didn't make Diamond Head disappear. He just turned you guys over to look out the ocean. See what you guys got to do. Turn back. Oh, there's Diamond Head. Thought we lost Diamond Head. See, when I teach this in college, I got to be joking too. Ihilani would remember, you know, because I got to keep my students engaged, right? Because when I was learning history at Kamehameha, oh, you fall asleep. It's like, gotta make it fun. You gotta bring out some more Portuguese blood. You know, you got the hands going. Okay, here's an indictment that rings eerily similar to Hawaii. Not exactly, but eerily similar. This is an indictment. United States and all these countries versus Hermann Goering, Rudolf Hess. These are the Nazis. Nuremberg trials. Count 3, war crimes. Germanization of occupied territories. Did you know that's a war crime? In certain occupied territories, purportedly annexed. Yeah, because Germany said to Luxembourg, we got you. It's like America, we got you. No, you didn't. Purportedly annexed to Germany, the defendants, the Nazis, not the Germans, the Nazis, methodically and pursuant to plan, endeavored to assimilate those territories politically, culturally, socially, and economically into the German Reich. The defendants endeavored to obliterate the former national character of these territories. In pursuance of these plans and endeavors, the defendants forcibly deported inhabitants who were predominantly non-German and introduced thousands of German colonists. Well, they didn't really send us out, but they sent plenty here. In fact, my great-grandfather, Charles Reeves, came from Tennessee, 1900. He didn't know Hawaii was occupied. He was led to believe we were part of the United States too. Did you know that American citizens in 1890 census only numbered, how much was it? 2%, about 1,300 people, out of a population of 90,000. By 1950, that population explodes to 450,000 people. Yeah. So this was just an onslaught, just inertia, just moving nonstop. This plan included economic domination, physical conquest, installation of puppet governments, purported lawful annexations, and enforced drafting or conscription into the German armed forces. This was carried out in most of the occupied countries, including Norway, France, Luxembourg, Soviet Union, Denmark, Belgium, and Holland. That was 1941 to 1945. And this pretty much sounds similar to what happened here, yo. So war crimes, what are war crimes? Right? Because war crimes are real. Not everything is a war crime. Something specific has to be war crimes. One of them is denationalization. That's a war crime, I already covered that, right? Well, this is from the International Criminal Court, the Rome Statute. And there are certain elements that go to war crimes. Number one, there is no requirement for a legal evaluation by the perpetrator as to the existence of an armed conflict, which is a state of war, or its character as international or domestic, like a civil war. In that context, there is no requirement for awareness by the perpetrator of the facts that establish the character of the state of war. Because the state of war exists whether you like it or not. And third, there is only a requirement for the awareness of the factual circumstances that establish the existence of an armed conflict. The United States in 1993 passed an apology resolution apologizing for the illegal overthrow. Did you know they even mentioned in the apology law, act of war? Yeah, 1993, they actually inserted it in there. I was like, whoa. I wouldn't have done that. But it only reaffirmed what 1993 said. Right? So what are the war crimes that get prosecuted? War crime of destruction and appropriation of property. Elements: the perpetrator destroyed or appropriated certain property. Pearl Harbor. All those lands taken, yeah, from families. All those lands in Waikiki taken from families. That's called unlawful appropriation. That's a war crime. Especially when you did it without their consent. But if I say, oh, we have an executive order. Yeah, but that's not a Hawaiian Kingdom executive order. That's an executive order from the President of the United States or from the governor. The destruction or appropriation was not justified by military necessity. The destruction was extensive and carried out wantonly. Such property was protected under one or more of the Geneva Conventions. And the perpetrator was aware of the factual circumstances. Blah, blah, blah. These are the elements. Main thing is destruction and appropriation of property. Makua Valley, Schofield Barracks, Kaho'olawe. That's war crimes. See, once you start getting into the football mode, it starts to get very hot in this kitchen. And guys going, ooh, gee, I thought I just came in to listen to some Hawaiian history. Who's this guy, Dr. Sai, talking about this? Another war crime, compelling service in hostile forces. All the drafting, that's a war crime. What about those who were drafted who died? Yeah. You see how this stuff is getting serious. War crime of denying a fair trial. Okay, all the courts in Hawaii, they're created by U.S. law. State of Hawaii, right? That's an unfair trial. That's not even a lawful court. That's a war crime. Unlawful deportation and transfer. What about those prisoners being sent off to Oklahoma? That would be a war crime. Unlawful confinement. Getting arrested and being put in prison. Because the state of Hawaii can't be a government. Because the state of Hawaii was created by the United States Congress. So actually the state of Hawaii is the biggest sovereignty group in Hawaii. It's just fully armed. And if you don't listen to them, you get put in what is called the prison. But that's called unlawful confinement. That's a war crime. The only way that people can get away with it is when you don't know it. War crime of destroying or seizing the enemy's property. War crime of depriving nationals of the hostile power, the occupied state, the rights of actions to try to protect itself in court. Say, hey, I'm a Hawaiian subject. This court doesn't have jurisdiction. I need to be prosecuted under Hawaiian Kingdom law. You crazy. Denied. That's a war crime. War crime of compelling participation in military operations. Vietnam, South Korea, no, not South Korea, World War I, World War II. War crime of pillaging. You know all the taxes you guys pay? It's actually pillaging. Because the state of Hawaii, who I'm actually a part of, because I teach at the university, so my salary comes from pillage monies. I'm serious. So this thing is not like in the corner. This is a web that is over all of us. And when one moves, everybody moves. So I'm not casting blame. I'm just explaining a situation, right? And finally, war crime of sentencing or execution without due process. Did you know in the 1920s, there are a lot of executions in Hawaii, territory of Hawaii? Yeah, a lot of hangings. War crimes. This is huge. So when we drive around, I'm sure you're going to see things differently now, because now you know what football looks like. It's like I just showed you what a highlighter yellow looks like. You're going to see yellow all over this place. One particular thing that you're going to see, a yellow highlight that you see every day, but you never thought about it in this way. The sign of the American occupation. Remember that flag that I showed you from Kamehameha I with the Union Jack? It's not the state of Hawaii flag. That's the Hawaiian Kingdom flag. They just hijacked it. And that's a national flag, right, of a country called the Hawaiian Kingdom that existed when President Cleveland said, by an act of war, the government of a friendly confining people has been overthrown. This is a sign of the American occupation. It doesn't look like the state of Hawaii anymore, because now you know. And you can't erase it anymore. See, now you kind of close your eyes. It's like, I compare this to lightning, which is the flash, and the thunder, which is the sound. And there is what is called flash to bang, right? In the artillery, we would actually see a flash and you start counting. 1,001, 1,002, 1,003, boom. Okay, times that 3 seconds by roughly 300 meters, you're talking close to a kilometer away. See, that's flash to bang. You can tell your distance. Some of you are actually seeing a lot of flashes, but you haven't heard the boom yet. Tonight, when you guys go home, it might come around 2:30 in the morning. And it's gonna go, boom! And you go, what the hell? Trust me, I went through it. Because at first, it's just mesmerizing, like, wow, wow, wow. And then it's gonna hit. For some of you, you're in ground zero. The flash to bang right now. So you can actually do that with lightning. Yeah, try it. Start counting. But if you see the lightning and the boom, you better hit the ground. And you didn't get hit. So I'm walking you through a narrative here, yeah, that I didn't make up. And I'm using original source information that has been vetted, right? And this is what we teach. But I'm walking to your point where what are we going to do, right? Because it gets to the point where now what? I'm not one to tell you a joke without the punchline. I'll tell you, come back next week, I'll tell you the punchline. I'll share with you how to fix this problem. But can you understand why it's important to know the game of football first? Yes. Before you even come up with any plays. Because some of the plays you're coming up with, it's kind of mixing baseball, soccer, badminton. Yeah. And then you get pissed off because it ain't working and you blame the holy. And then, hey, how many you bought holy? Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's right. So what happened? The government, the country, we know the state still exists, right? The state, the independent state, the Hawaiian Kingdom, the state, it exists. The government. What happened to the government? I like to say the government was merely taken over through hijacking. It's like Hawaiian Airlines was the Hawaiian Kingdom flying high in the sky, along with American Airlines, British Airways, right? All these sovereign states flying high, right? And they have a pilot there, and you got everybody in the cabin. The only thing that changed in our plane right here was the name and the executive head. Everything else stayed the same. You did? So all they did was remove Queen Liliuokalani from the pilots, from the cockpit, replace them with insurgents, lock the door, and put U.S. Marines in front of them so nobody could get at them. And then they released sleeping gas into the cabin, and flight attendants were coming by saying, "You're American, you're American. Speak English, speak English." And after a while, you fell asleep, and you now live in a world called the state of Hawaii. Yeah? The Matrix. So basically what happened in 1893, name change. Oops. To the provisional government. January 17, 1893. That's all it did. How can 13 people take over an entire country? Decapitation, regime change. You need the military to back you up. Without it, you're going to get arrested and prosecuted and probably convicted and executed on the Hawaiian law for treason. That's why, remember, Cleveland said it would have been no doubt what the insurgents would have dealt with, right? So they changed the name to the provisional government. And then they had people in the executive branches, judicial branch, sign oaths of allegiance. That's all they did. And if you don't sign the oath of allegiance, you don't have a job. Then in 1894, the provisional government changed its name to the Republic of Hawaii. Same infrastructure, just more painting of this plane. And then Republic of Hawaii changed to the Territory of Hawaii. So now the plane is painted red, white, and blue, and it says American Airlines. Then in 1959, it changed to the state of Hawaii. The only thing changed in all of this was the executive head. Everything else stayed the same. They actually had it right in front of us. And our own people, through brainwashing, have stepped right into the shoes of the insurgents without even knowing it. And carrying on with what they did. So my cousin, who's a cop, My son, who's a cop, I was in the Army National Guard, which used to be called the King's Guard. They just hijacked it. Yeah. All the public schools from 1830s. Did you know Kamehameha Schools is actually one of the oldest, the youngest schools, 1887. St. Louis, I think 1843. Yeah, it used to be called St. Louis College. Iolani, 1870s, Iolani College. St. Andrew's Priory, 1870s. Kauai Howell Seminary, mid-back. You know, so we're looking at this like, whoa, it's like they changed everything right in front of us. All it was that they changed was our head, our mind. Everything is the same. Did you know Iolani College is still there? Alii Iolani College is still there. Fire department, Kingdom Era. Yeah. Police department, sheriffs, Kingdom Era. Courts, Kingdom Era. Everything Kingdom Era. And yet we were told America created this.
You know, the most obvious is Daniel Inouye International.
Exactly.
That's so obviously blatant. It's disgusting to write about. It's a good deal to write about. I hate that damn recording on that.
Well, on top of that, Thomas Jefferson Elementary, Abraham Lincoln Elementary, Theodore Roosevelt High School. Crazy. And we just accept it. Not that we accept it, we just didn't know. See, and now, once we know, now everybody getting scared, like, ooh. So this is, it gets to a point, well, now what? Well, actually, I woke up to this in 1994. That was a long time ago. 1994, I woke up to this. I was in the back, I think I was row 13E, in the back. I woke up. I had a bad dream. I was in a state of Hawaii. I'm looking around, everybody's sleepy. I was like, whoa, what's going on? It's like I woke up from 1893. And then I realized I can't get into the cockpit. There's somebody else flying the plane. It ain't the Queen. Then I'm going, this looks like American Airlines. I was like, what the hell is going on here? And I'm telling you the truth. I'm just using this as an analogy. It was like I was the only one that woke up in 1994. Because when I talked to people, they thought I was nuts, including my own family. Oh, big time. That's why my tutu said, you know too much. No, but tutu, this is what happened. Shh, I'm on. Sa. Constantly, sa. Okay, whatever. But I was kolohe. And I think maybe that's why I woke up, because I was real kolohe. I would test anything. My family knows me, I was kolohe. Even at Kamehameha Schools, I was kolohe. All I cared about was trying to beat St. Louis. Education wasn't on the top of my priority list until I joined the military. And I went, oh, there's consequences for my actions. So I guess maybe I had the makeup to wake up first, right? You know, like, my name is David too, David Keanu Sai. David and Goliath. I'm like, ooh, that's some big brother. I take you on. I can take you on. So basically what I realized, there was no lawful government in Hawaii since 1893. Can you understand why I'm saying that now? It's not a political statement. I'm just saying it's a fact. Territory of Hawaii was created by the United States Congress. State of Hawaii created by the United States Congress. Republic of Hawaii created by intervention, puppet regime, formerly the provisional government. That's illegal. President Cleveland said it, not me. I'm just realizing that. So if the Hawaiian Kingdom as a state still exists, we need to bring that information out. But how do you bring it out without a government? We have to create a government. Well, it's not just creating a government. The point is, how do you create a government? And normal people would say, well, elections. Hey, you got some sovereignty groups around. Hey, we can elect you. No. That's like electing somebody for the Grand Poobah in a Water Buffalo Ranch. See, then I say that because then I know how old you are, because that's from the Flintstones. I'm not being facetious. I'm just throwing that out because that was Barney Rubble and Fred Flintstone, members of the Water Buffalo Lodge. The reason why you can't vote, let me ask you folks this. This is what I had to go through back then. So who registers voters? Let's say California. not Hawaii. Who registers voters in California? Very similar to Hawaii though, because you can say what it would be here and apply it there. The government, called the governor's office. Normally it's the lieutenant governor. Yeah? And they register voters, right? And then who mans the voting polls? Who runs it? The government.
Office of Elections.
Office of Election, that's government. See, the point is I'm making it's government, right? Who convenes the legislature after they're elected? The governor. So what you need in order to make a government during a state of peace, you need elections. But how do you do that if you're occupied? Because our government was overthrown in 1893, right? Right? So how do you get people elected if you need the government first? Right? That's like what comes first, the chicken or the egg? So right off the bat, I can tell you, you cannot have elections in occupied territories because you're not in control of the territory. The occupier is, and they must administer the laws of the occupied state. You don't have elections, period. What you do is you have elections when the occupation will come to an end. Then you get the transfer. Okay? Not now. So I knew you can't have voting. But I still asked, how can a government be created then without voting, without elections? Especially when everybody doesn't know anything. Well, you got to look at other examples. You have to look at other examples called occupations around the world of states, of independent states. Well, I took a look at World War II, in particular Belgium. Did you know the Nazis captured King Leopold and took him prisoner? Belgian citizens fled after Belgium was occupied, and they formed a government in exile in London. It was called a provisional government. It was done through necessity. Necessity. Necessity is the mother of all inventions. In the military, we do it all the time. A private can become a lieutenant in time of war. He has to assume the chain of command in order to maintain the command structure. But he's not commissioned. He's a private. He's called an acting lieutenant. Does that make sense? Did you know that's exactly what they did with regard to governments in exile? Out of necessity, they assumed the chain of command. And they formed in Belgium, because Belgium had a constitutional monarchy, King Leopold. There was a section in their constitution that referred to a council of regency. Council of regency made up of cabinet officers, ministers. Regent or regency is defined as serving in the absence of a monarch. A regent is not a monarch. It serves in the absence of a monarch. So the Council of Regency of Belgium was formed by necessity in exile by Belgian citizens. And I'm looking at these things, trying to find ways of how to approach it. I'm like, hey, Article 33, Hawaiian Kingdom Constitution, Regency. It's almost like we borrowed Belgium's provisions and it's in our Constitution. I was like, hey, we can do that. So what we did was we formed a way to assume the chain of command up to the cabinet ministers, Attorney General, Foreign Affairs, Finance, Interior. Under Article 33 of the Hawaiian Constitution, it's called a Council of Regency. And this Council of Regency is going to represent the Hawaiian state. It has no effectiveness, right? It cannot collect taxes because the occupier is supposed to be doing that. All it has is a mouth. And what we're going to do is expose. So what is the doctrine of necessity in order for us to do what we did back in 1995, 1 year after I retired? An imperative necessity must arise of the existence of exceptional circumstances not provided for in the Constitution for immediate action to be taken to protect or preserve some vital function of the state. Not the people, the state, right? There must be no other course of action reasonably available. Action taken must be necessary in the interests of peace, order, and good government. It must not impair the just rights of citizens under the Constitution. So even though you folks don't even know what was going on in 1995, we couldn't violate that because then it could be used against us later once you wake up. Yeah, you're in seat 23F. Then you wake up. Did you know you can still hold the Council of Regency accountable? And it must not have the intention of consolidating power, because if it does have the intention of consolidating power, that's treason. We're doing no different than what they did in 1893. So we have to be very careful how we play this, but we're also vicariously liable for what we do and what we say.
You know, Keanu, there's a manual that was put out, I'm not sure if it was in the 1920s. Keanu had given me a copy, and it was how to transition.
Yeah, that was from that was from Marshall Wilson.
Okay.
Marshall Charles Wilson actually had that.
Why can't we use that manual?
No, everything's there.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm seriously. What we're waking up to, everything is there. We just don't know how to understand it. It's not about, we all got to get together and figure it out. No, trust me, our kupuna already figured it out.
Yeah.
It's just we don't understand how to speak their language. That's like trying to listen to a Hawaiian language speaker, but all you speak is French. You're not going to get it. So that's the part of education. That's what I'm referring to. So this is not about reinventing the wheel. And this formation of an acting government is following the rules. It's not making up the rules. So here's the independent state of 1843, separate from the government. We know the government was illegally overthrown. The country still exists. We merely created an acting council of regency. That's all we did. 4 people. The purpose of the acting government as officers de facto to expose the prolonged and illegal occupation of the Hawaiian Kingdom by the United States. Expose it. Just talk. Did you know in 1995 when it was formed, people did not know what we were saying because everyone is still sleeping. But our job was to keep exposing, to ensure that the United States complies with the laws of occupation, which includes the Hague and Geneva Conventions. Now I'm coming from a military standpoint. How do you ensure compliance? Put them on notice. Even put my cousin on notice. Say, hey, Hawaiian, I'll be careful right now. This stuff is for real, right? And finally, to provide for an effective transition for governance under Hawaiian law when the occupation comes to an end. See, then the government becomes permanent. Right now, it's all provisional. And we're operating just like Belgium's government in exile. We're taking their cue, right? So we're going to deal with this. Donald James Wheel, a novelist, says, when a well-packaged web of lies has been sold gradually to the masses over generations, the truth will seem utterly preposterous and its speaker a raving lunatic. That is what they thought we were in 1995. But we knew otherwise. We just had to, that was our job. Because if we didn't do that, we can be held accountable by somebody who was attacking us, woke up and said, now I'm going to hold you accountable. Now, everything that I just shared with you is going to come to a test. Is this really a government? Did we follow the appropriate process to actually create a government without an election under the doctrine of necessity during a state of war? See, all of that all comes into play, right? This is like, you folks remember Dick Tomey, kind of far back? Yep. He had a particular play that kind of threw everybody out called the Muddle Huddle. Yeah. You guys remember that, the Muddle Huddle? Guy here with the ball and all the rest of the team over here. Did you know he didn't violate any rules? That was actually a valid play, but it was a creative play. And that's what we had to do, was before you can create a muddle huddle, we had to understand the rule book. How can we do this, right? Because I cannot argue with somebody, this is what we do. It has to be self-evident. It is what it is. I can't argue it. That's how it's supposed to work, right? That's how laws work, okay? So the test is going to be here. So you know that exposure that I was doing? There was a guy who was receiving that information called Lance Larson. And I told him, you got to follow Hawaiian Kingdom law. I was telling everybody. And I said, I understand the problem, but this is what I'm supposed to say. You got to follow Hawaiian Kingdom law. He decides to follow Hawaiian Kingdom law. Because in the Hawaiian law books of 1893, there was no statute for driver's licenses. Why? Because there was no automobile in 1893. The driver's licenses today are American law. So now he's going to test that on his own. I didn't even recommend that. So he put a big placard on the back of his truck. He's from Kurdistan, Big Island. Put a big placard on the back of his truck restating Section 6 of the Hawaiian Civil Code, which says, and I know it by heart, the laws are obligatory upon all persons, whether subjects of this kingdom or citizens or subjects of any foreign state while within the limits of this kingdom. See, that speaks to independence. You are under Hawaiian law. And he put that on the back of his truck and he was driving around Hilo. And he got a lot of tickets. Because he didn't have a license plate on, he took it off, drove without seatbelt. And I actually knew the police officer that gave him all the tickets. He's a friend of mine. And he goes to court. Choke tickets. And he's represented by Ninia Parks, who's Hawaiian, but blonde-haired, blue-eyed Wahine. Did you know that she didn't even know she was Native Hawaiian? She was adopted, raised in California. When you get older, you want to find your biological parents. She found out that her biological parents were in Hawaii. She found out that she was Native Hawaiian and a Hawaiian subject. But she also found out that her great-great-grandfather, the second great-grandfather, was a guy named William Kinney, Kinney. William Kinney was the insurgent, the traitor, that prosecuted Queen Lili'uokalani in that kangaroo court for misprision of treason. So Ninia shared this story with me that she needed to make amends for her family. So she started representing people who were Hawaiian subjects who understood their history, not sovereignty activists. And that one person was Lance Larson, as well as others. So he goes to court. I'm brought in as an expert witness. And you know, you can't just claim to be an expert witness, right? You got to be accepted as an expert. So I go on the stand, give my credentials. I didn't even have a master's or PhD back then. I was just a retired captain from the Army that kind of knew my stuff. And then the prosecution tries to drill me to show I'm not an expert, and I'm correcting them. And Judge Sandra Schutte says, okay, stop. Mr. Sai definitely has qualified himself as an expert on Hawaiian Kingdom law. And then it started. And basically what I said was, there's no treaty between Hawaii and the United States. Hawaii's still an occupied state. And that you're supposed to be administering Hawaiian Kingdom law. That was my testimony. So she was kind of thrown off guard. It got to a point where she went in the back for quite a while, came out, told Lance Larson to stand, and she said, I've come to a decision. I'm going to fine you something like $900. And I'm watching the whole thing. And then he says, and she asks him, are you going to pay it? And he said, no, you didn't show me the treaty. Because if I pay it, I'm following American law and I'm committing treason against the Hawaiian Kingdom. All on his own. And I was like, ooh, right on, brother. And she said, that's what I thought you said. She ordered him to be locked up for 30 days, 7 days solitary confinement. How was that? Yeah, that was 1998. Yeah, that's pretty harsh. So Ninia was afraid because Lance might get beaten up in prison. She wanted to get him out because that is too severe. So she wanted to put in what is called a petition for writ of habeas corpus, right? That was the plan. But then she looked at me and, Ninia Parks changed her looks. Before I was all good because I'm just the expert on this. Now she looked at me, hey, you with the Hawaiian government. You're with the acting counsel of Regency. You're supposed to be protecting my client. And I went, you're right. That's what we're supposed to do. We are responsible, but we're not liable because it's the United States that's supposed to be administering Hawaiian Kingdom law, not us. We're exposing it. But I see your point, because we're still vicariously liable. So she filed a lawsuit against the Hawaiian Kingdom government, the Council of Regency, the United States, and the UN in federal court in Honolulu. Judge Samuel King's chambers, his office. United Nations was dismissed because of sovereign immunity. Ninia Parks comes up to me and says, she heard that the United States was going to move to dismiss the case. And I said, let's have a meeting. So we met with her, the Council of Regency met. We had our acting attorney general, a real attorney. Now in Hawaiian, read a book, think he's an attorney. A real one. And we had a meeting, and we basically told her that this dispute that we have is in a court called the federal court in Honolulu that is just as illegal as the court in Kea'au that put your client away. They were both created by U.S. law. They're not Hawaiian Kingdom courts. And they're not military tribunals established under the Hague and Geneva Conventions. So we said, why don't you dismiss the United States off the docket, and they will enter into an arbitration agreement, binding arbitration, because we're going to leapfrog from here to a court that would have jurisdiction of international matters, and that's the Permanent Court of Arbitration. That's what happened. Okay? So, Permanent Court of Arbitration was formed in 1899. Remember the Hague Convention? The first Hague Conventions regulating war, codification, 1899. But you know the Hague Convention number 1, the first Hague Convention, is what formed this court. And the reason why they formed it was so that states can resolve their disputes without going to war. But if you cannot resolve the dispute and you go to war, then you're going to use the rest of the Hague Conventions that regulate the war. That's how it works. Then it was later replaced by the 1907 Hague Convention, number 1. So, they deal with arbitration. Now, the Permanent Court of Arbitration is an intergovernmental organization that creates tribunals to resolve disputes, international disputes. They don't have courts that are sitting there waiting, like you walk into circuit court and you're going to go to judge so-and-so. What they do is, before they can create a tribunal that will focus on a particular dispute, let's say a boundary dispute, then you would put arbitrators together that have expertise in boundaries. If it's occupation or the law of occupation and dispute, then you bring in experts that are knowledgeable in that area. That's called a tribunal of arbitrators. Basically, the judges are the experts, and that's the uniqueness of arbitration. So they have to determine, first of all, that between the countries that have a dispute, one of them has to be a state. One of them has to be a country, right? A state. And remember we talked about an independent state, right? Okay, so you file the case. When India Parks filed it, that was November of 1999. The Secretary General of the Permanent Court of Arbitration and his administration, called the Secretariat, had to do their due diligence to determine whether or not the Hawaiian Kingdom, which had a dispute with Lance Larson, was in fact a state. Okay? So, once they verify that one of the parties is a state, they form the tribunal. So that's called institutional jurisdiction. That's why not anybody can get into the Permanent Court of Arbitration. You have to meet the minimum requirements. So between two states, you have a dispute like South China Sea, Philippines versus China. In this case, you got Ecuador versus the United States. The United States even accesses the Permanent Court. This is a dispute between Ecuador, state, United States, state. Then they form the tribunal. Between a state and an international organization. Peru versus United Nations. Peru, state, United Nations, international organization. Then they form the tribunal. Our case, Lance Larson versus the Hawaiian Kingdom, state and a private party. And this was a case, Lance Larson, a dispute between Larson and the Hawaiian Kingdom, whereby Lance Larson, a Hawaiian subject, alleges that the government of the Hawaiian Kingdom is in continual violation of these treaties, and they are alleging that we are allowing the unlawful imposition of American municipal laws over Lance Larson. They identified Lance Larson as a private entity, the Hawaiian Kingdom as a state. So, this is the handout that you folks have right here. Okay? Now, and this is from the Permanent Court of Arbitration's website. So the dispute came under the 1849 treaty, which recognized Hawaii as an independent state by the United States. The seat of the arbitration is in the Netherlands, language English. These are the three arbitrators. In fact, these two arbitrators later became judges on the International Court of Justice. So it kind of gives you the caliber of these people, right? And there's India Parks for Lance Larson, and there's me representing the Hawaiian Kingdom. So I'm pretty much familiar with this case. You know, the irony was when I came home, after oral hearings were held in 2000, December, because the case started in 99. When I came home, I had sovereignty groups trying to tell me what happened in the case. Yeah, no, they started telling me what I did wrong. They said, no, I'm like, bro, you talking baseball? And after a while, I can't even talk. It's like talking to the trees. I'm serious, because the case was huge. But because people were totally ignorant, And the sovereignty groups didn't know nothing. They were just as ignorant as everybody else. Because I am not part of a sovereignty movement. Sovereignty is in the country. That's how we got there. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm not chasing sovereignty. I'm acting on it. Like anybody could. You just got to do it the right way. So, American Journal of International Law clearly explains what the whole case was about. At the center of the PCA proceeding was that the Hawaiian Kingdom continues to exist and that the Hawaiian Council of Regency, representing the Hawaiian Kingdom, is legally responsible under international law for the protection of Hawaiian subjects, including the claimant, Lance Larson. Now, when this article came out in the American Journal of International Law, they didn't interview me. They just went by the record. That shows you they understand what international law is, right? In other words, the Hawaiian Kingdom was legally obligated to protect Larson from the United States' unlawful imposition over him of its municipal laws through its political subdivision, the state of Hawaii. As a result of this responsibility, Larson submitted that the Hawaiian Council of Regency should be liable for any international law violations that the United States had committed against it. That was the case. It was not about whether or not the Hawaiian Kingdom exists. It exists. That's how we got in. The question is the government of the Hawaiian Kingdom liable for not protecting Lance Larson where war crimes was committed against him? Remember, unfair trial, unlawful confinement. That was the issue, right? But Lance Larson had to deal with the problem of the United States not being involved. So before the case began, the hearings began in December. This is back in February. I get a call from the Secretary General of the Permanent Court of Arbitration because I'm the representative of the government. I'm leading the legal team, right? He calls me and he says that they can find no evidence that the Hawaiian Kingdom does not exist. That's how he framed it. He didn't say the Hawaiian Kingdom is not currently recognized. No, because once you're a country, it doesn't matter on recognition. The country is the country, it exists. Now, whether your government is recognized, that's called diplomatic recognition. And you can withdraw that and give it at any time. Make sense? So he asked me, he says, in order to and he also admitted, because Nina Parks brought it up with him in the paperwork, that the Hawaiian-Dutch Treaty, the Hawaiian Kingdom Treaty with the Netherlands, that's where the court is. He tells me that that treaty has not been canceled. I said, yeah, we know. So he's back actually getting on board on what's going on. And you know what? It's really good to talk to people who know what they're talking about. Because you can actually have a conversation. And not trying to explain to someone, let me explain to you what sovereignty means. Let me explain to you the separation between the state and the government. It's already a part of, it's a variable in this equation. So he says, in order to maintain the integrity of this case, he recommends that the Hawaiian government, not Lance Larson, that the Hawaiian government travel to Washington and provide an invitation to the United States to join in the arbitration. Because it was them who prosecuted him. See, Lance is only coming after us, his attorney is not Lance. The attorney is coming after us because of the unlawful imposition of American laws that led to his incarceration, that led to his unfair trial. We didn't commit the violations. He's holding us liable for those violations, like a tort case, right? A civil tort case. So the Secretary General recommended that I travel to Washington to provide the United States an invitation. So on March 3rd, 2000, Linnea Parks and I were in Washington, D.C. And I had a meeting with John Crook from the U.S. State Department. All information given to him beforehand, a couple days before. And we had a meeting with him in the afternoon, but we had the option of calling him. And I told Ms. Parks, I said, we don't need to talk to him. We're just here to provide an invitation. And then provide evidence that we provide the invitation and we give it to the Permanent Court of Arbitration. That's all we need to do. So in the morning I said, let's call him. So we called. And I remember this conversation very clearly. He said, first thing, and the Permanent Court accepted this case? I said, yep. In fact, the Permanent Court of Arbitration Secretary General requested that the Hawaiian government come and provide an invitation to you. And he started to get real quiet because he knew who the Secretary General was. Because you got to be a state to be entered. I thought we were the 50th state. See, that's what he's thinking. He said, wait a minute, you got in? And then I said, I'm here to provide a formal invitation, and my conversation with you will be reduced to writing. And I went through the whole thing, put it in writing. I sent it to him to make sure this is what we talked about, and I carbon copied the Permanent Court of Arbitration registry. They know we gave the invitation. Now, right there, it's pretty bold, yeah, because we're going to accomplish, we're going to kill two birds with one stone. One is the existence of the Hawaiian Kingdom as a state, and the Hawaiian Kingdom government's existence, the Acting Council of Regency. So 1 week later, a couple weeks later, I get a call from the Permanent Court of Arbitration, Phyllis Hamilton, the Deputy Secretary General. And she tells me that the reason why she's calling is because they've been notified by the American Embassy in The Hague, that's the State Department, has a response to the invitation. And she tells me that they denied the invitation to join in the arbitration, meaning, how are you going to try to justify American laws can be imposed that led to Lance Larson's incarceration? See, it's not about whether or not the kingdom exists. We're past that. How do you justify imposition of American laws? And then she says, but they asked permission from the Hawaiian government if they could have access to all records and pleadings. Because arbitral records are not public unless you make them public. So I said, absolutely, we'll give the consent. So the Permanent Court of Arbitration Secretary General was the deal maker. They was the intermediary to form the agreement. By that agreement, which the U.S. now could access, the United States State Department explicitly recognized the continuity of the Hawaiian Kingdom as an independent state in arbitration with the national, and also explicitly recognized the Hawaiian Kingdom government that gave them permission to access the records. Does that make sense? That's what they did. In international relations or international law, it's called an agreement by exchange of note verbal. That's the term. Executive agreement. Okay. That, remember, international law, right? It's all agreements. That's how it works. And the proceedings took place. So the hearings were going to be held at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in December of 2000. That's me over there with the beard, trying to look distinguished. And when you think about it, I only have a bachelor's degree at this time. Yeah. But I knew this stuff because I had to, because my butt was in line. That's what I had to make sure I got the I, cross the T's on everything. So here is a short clip of this proceedings in The Hague.
The dominion of the Hawaiian Kingdom. In summary, from 1840, the Hawaiian Kingdom possessed a constitutional government with elected and appointed officials and a complete system of civil and criminal laws to govern Hawaiian territory. On April 8, 1842, King Commander III and Privy Council commissions 3 envoys to secure international recognition of Hawaiian independence. And these individuals are Timoteo Ha'alilio, William Richards, and Sir George Simpson. On December 19, 1842, Hawaiian envoys secured United States President Tyler's recognition of Hawaiian independence. November 28, 1843, the British government and the French government formally entered into a declaration recognizing Hawaiian independence. In our pleadings, we refer to that as the 1843 Anglo-Franco Proclamation. From that point, Hawaii has had its statehood recognized as being independent. As such, it began to enter into these treaties. Austria-Hungary, Denmark, France, Germany,
It's all part of our
Great Britain, Italy, Japan, Netherlands, Russia, Spain, and the United States of America. International recognition is evidence that the Hawaiian Kingdom have diplomatic representatives as of 1893 from those countries, as far as consulates and embassies. Rather, what we find is that the United States has never expressed itself as an occupier. Who would? They will never admit to occupation. But yet, to admit to occupation is, in a sense, to admit to the continued existence of the Hawaiian Kingdom as an independent state, which is really the crux of the matter, which is actually what is holding up, you might say, this issue to be resolved. Thus, the legal order, thus, the reestablishment of the government, thus, the relationship between its nationals.
I mean, to be slightly unkind, but thus the issue in rem. The point is that if the Hawaiian Kingdom continues to exist, its existence is in rem. It's not in personam. The Hawaiian existence, the Hawaiian Kingdom doesn't exist solely in the opinion of Mr. Larson.
Right. But that existence should not be dependent upon an occupier, because you basically put the occupier on an equal footing with the Hawaiian Kingdom in its own territory. So really what needs to be addressed is what came before the occupation, whether the statehood or whether the legality or illegality of the Hawaiian Kingdom, not the illegality or legality of the United States as an occupier. Should the tribunal find it has jurisdiction, we are prepared to submit an offer of proof. We felt that this tribunal would offer some clarity so that for the first time we have a third party to present these type of merits that can be scrutinized by international law, rather than taking it before a United States tribunal, which could not rule on it to the detriment of itself. So in that sense, there is really no other way to address this issue. And the opportunity did arise because it was Mr. Larson who was adhering to Hawaiian Kingdom law. And if the United States was adhering to occupation, not whether they're illegal or illegal, but if they were adhering to the laws of occupation, we wouldn't be here right now.
That was Linnea Parks. Yeah. See, when you watch that, you can tell I'm using football words up. And the arbitrator's using football words up, like in rem, in personam. Pretty amazing when I think about it. Like, wow, not bad. I knew a lot of stuff back then. I have my PhD yet. But this was a huge case. Huge. And everybody back home knew nothing. We tried to explain it. It was like talking to trees, right? But we just did what we had to do because we had to set the record. So the arbitration award came out. The tribunal stated a perusal of material discloses that in the 19th century, the Hawaiian Kingdom existed as an independent state, recognized as such by the United States, the United Kingdom, and various states. They verified Hawaii is an independent state because the unlawful imposition of American law is because of that, right? Remember independence? Now, what they came up with was they determined that they could not move forward because they cannot determine the United States violated Lance Larson's rights before they can hold us accountable for the violations without the United States participating. And that's called the indispensable third-party rule. Because sovereign countries are sovereign. You cannot subpoena them in and pull them in. They got to come in on their own. But that has nothing to do on whether or not the kingdom exists, right? That has everything to do with whether or not Lance Larson can sue the acting government. Because remember, we're the defendants. Larson versus the Hawaiian Kingdom. We're not the plaintiff. Lance Larson is. In fact, we didn't have to say anything. We could have just sit there. You know what we did? Remember, part of our responsibility is to expose. We're going to expose on this level. Let's do a PowerPoint so everybody can watch this. Make sure the transcript speaks to Hawaii's occupation. That's what we were doing. And then we sat back down, okay, hopefully he can't sue us. So the tribunal stated, it follows that the tribunal, which is a court, cannot determine whether the respondent, the Hawaiian government, has failed to discharge its obligations toward the claimant, Lance Larson, without ruling on the legality of the acts of the United States. Yet that is precisely what the monetary gold principle, the third-party rule, it precludes the tribunal from doing. As the International Court explained in the East Timor case, the court could not rule on the lawfulness of the conduct of a state called the Hawaiian government when its judgment would imply an evaluation of the lawfulness of the conduct of another state called the United States, which is not a party to the case. That's what the whole case was about. So we basically won the case. He couldn't come after us. We actually won as far as what took place before the case started. See, we won when they verified the existence of the Hawaiian Kingdom and us representing the Hawaiian Kingdom. That's where we won. Then we got to go, okay, now we got to make sure we kind of get sued. Because if we got to get sued, how are we going to pay them? kind of collect taxes. You know, America's supposed to be doing that. You know, another situation. But they did leave the opening for fact-finding. And they said at one stage of the proceedings, the question was raised whether some of these issues which the parties wish to present might not be done through fact-finding. In addition to its role as a facilitator of international arbitration, the permanent court has various procedures for fact-finding, both as between states and between a state and a private entity. Now, basically, fact-finding is when a is when a commission serves as a grand jury. So you present the facts, and they will find criminal liability, but it's up to another court to prosecute. That's fact-finding. So they not only said Lance Larson needs the United States, but they said, hey, you know what? Before you move toward ruling guilt or innocence of a party, why don't you guys go to the case? Right. Oops. Okay. So we decided not to pursue fact-finding, because who's going to pay for it? The cost for the arbitration came up to about $150,000. Yeah, somebody had to pay for it, right? This is not free. And we didn't have money after that to go fact-finding. What we decided was something more important. The Hawaiian government, we won the case. Lance Larson will take up your case later. What we need to do is we need to begin addressing denationalization. And this was December of 2000. When I came home, when the acting government came home, it was decided that I was going to enter the University of Hawaii Political Science Department, enter the master's program, get a master's degree specializing in international relations, and then get a PhD, focusing on the Hawaiian Kingdom and how to fix this problem. But I'm going to start to address all the misinformation in the university system. So when somebody says we're indigenous, no, we're not. We're Aboriginal. Watch the words. We're colonized, no, we're not. We're occupied. Watch the words. Right? Blame the Howley? No. Blame Lauren Thurston. But you also had some natives who was traders too, right? So it's not a racial game. You might say I wasn't well liked at the University of Hawaii when I went up there, because I was basically blowing up paradigms, and that was my job, part of the exposure. But what I wanted to do more so was to get into the university system to give them an opportunity to break this. Even though I had the ace in my pocket, I just came from The Hague. You're gonna tell me that didn't happen. But I'll make like, yeah, I'm just getting my master's degree, and you know how I change people? I do research. I read a law journal article. I get it peer reviewed, law review, right? I'm good with critique. In the Army, it's called after action review. Yeah, critique is good. A lot of locals kind of handle critiques. They like throw blows after you start critiquing. You say, hey, Hawaii, take it easy. I'm just pointing this out to make you better, right? But somehow we all get testy, right? Except the ones in the military, hey, they can handle. Because you learn from your mistakes. And that process was exposure. And then last year, through the exposure, I'm sitting on doctoral committees now. In fact, I taught 7 commitment school teachers in the master's program getting their master's degree. I was actually teaching classes last fall up at Paki 101, right? History teachers in Hawaiian history. I mean, it was awesome. See, you get me for about an hour and a half to 2 hours, all you hear is a lecture, and you're probably going to forget maybe in 2 days. You're going to say, yeah, I was talking about something. You get me for a whole semester, oh, trust me, we're going down the rabbit hole. We're going deep. And when we pop back up, you're going to be a different person, I guarantee. And sure enough, they were different people. One of them actually told me, he says, Keanu, I thought I would take this class to augment what I'm already teaching. I've come to the stark reality what I'm teaching is wrong. I got to fix it. I said, right on, because to me, that's taking kuleana. That's taking responsibility, because now you see how big this problem is. Let's start teaching the children and the young men and women the right history and emphasize critical thinking. Yeah? Show them everything, good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Because we're talking about a country, and that's what's important. So as we're going through all of this, and I'm doing a lot of things outside at the international level, the South China Sea pops up. And that's interesting. South China Sea, last summer, 2016, summer before. So Permanent Court of Arbitration, Republic of Philippines versus China. You notice they identified Philippines state, China state, just like they identified Hawaiian Kingdom state. Keep that in mind. Now, the case came up on an indispensable third party. The tribunal actually brought up that issue. Could they proceed without a country or countries that are not participating. Because the South China Sea has a lot of other countries that border it. It's not just Philippines and China. Yeah? It's Vietnam. It's Malaysia, Indonesia, right? Brunei, Philippines, okay? The question arose about Vietnam. They're not party to it. Can they proceed without Vietnam? And when I was following, I said, indispensable third party. Hey, that's us. And I know that rule. And I thought, hey, why did they cite the Hawaiian Kingdom? Because the only two precedent cases there, which I showed you, was Monetary Gold and East Timor. These were the two cases on indispensable third party. And I just thought, hey, maybe they might cite the Hawaiian Kingdom. Because it was in the same permanent court of arbitration. So I pulled up the arbitration paper. Arbitration order, paragraph 181. The present situation is different from the few cases in which an international court or tribunal has declined to proceed due to the absence of an indispensable third party, namely Monetary Gold, East Timor, and Larson versus Hawaiian Kingdom. Oh. Now we're a precedent case. We're like Roe versus Wade. If this was frivolous, they wouldn't be doing this. That actually rhymed it. In all those cases, the rights of third states, respectively Albania, Monetary Gold, Indonesia, East Timor, and the United States, Larson, would not only have been affected by a decision in the case, but would have formed the very subject matter of the decision. Additionally, in those cases, the lawfulness of activities by third states was in question, whereas here, none of the Philippines' claims entail allegations of unlawful conduct by Vietnam or other third states. So basically, Philippines was able to get through that indispensable third-party rule and proceed. Nina Parks couldn't do it. She was stuck, just like the East Timor and the Monetary Gold case. They couldn't do it. But that is important. That means the Hawaiian Kingdom is a precedent case. And that's when I went, wow, we got to start moving even faster. So you know that fact-finding that we're supposed to do, which was recommended? Permanent Court of Arbitration does fact-finding. We're setting up the commission. 3 commissioners are going to determine first what is the function and role of the government of the Hawaiian Kingdom in accordance with international humanitarian law, which is the laws of war. Second, what are the duties and obligations of the government of the Hawaiian Kingdom toward Lance Larson, and by extension all Hawaiian subjects residing in Hawaii and abroad. And finally, what are the duties and obligations of the government of the Hawaiian Kingdom toward protected persons who are in Hawaii, and these people are not Hawaiian subjects. These could be French citizens, Germans, because remember, they're all subject to Hawaiian Kingdom law. But we're not in control, but we're speaking on behalf of the state. So we started this process. We actually had 3 commissioners formed. 1 from Belgium, 2 from Great Britain. And that's when, in January, we're supposed to actually have the hearings here in this building.
Yeah.
January 16th and the 17th. This thing was moving fast.
What happened?
All of a sudden, the United States is pulling on a full press. This thing is going too fast because this is big, right? And they basically got the Permanent Court of Arbitration to put a halt on administrative aspect of these proceedings. So right now we're dealing with the administration aspect, not with the substance. But it does tell you it's moving, because at the same time the United States was moving at that level, the state of Hawaii on January 15th started moving against me and Dexter Kayama, because I'm representing the Hawaiian Kingdom, he's representing Lance Larson. Now they're accusing us of committing felonies in the courts, propaganda. Oh yeah. But you know what? The only time you come after this is when it's a threat. You don't come after this if it's frivolous. So that's where I still got to be maka'ala, and good thing I was in the army. You know, I'm totally strategic and tactical, right? And my weapons are liability, right? Instead of the 105 howitzers, or the 198s, I got my fingers. Just go, take that. Emotion, subject matter jurisdiction. War crime. Because I have access to these places, right? The only thing that everybody's hoping is if they can pound us so nobody will listen. And that's pretty reminiscent of what happened in the 1990s, which you'll see. But it's all part of the process. That's part of the process, right? Part of the education and exposure, what's the effect? Tom Kaufman, 1998, came out with his book, Nation Within, the 100th anniversary of so-called annexation. It says, the story of America's annexation of the nation of Hawaii. Well, that's wrong. Hawaii wasn't annexed, because a joint resolution cannot annex anything, right?
Yes.
He changed it in 2009. This book, second edition. Now it says, the history of the American occupation of Hawaii. Now, Tom Kaufman is a respected writer, and he used to work for the Star Bulletin. And he made that change, and before he made it, he called me. Because I know Tom. He says, hey, Keanu, so when I let you know I'm changing the subtitle to occupation from annexation. And he said, as an American, it really was hard for him to come to that point. Because he knew it was true, but he couldn't come to that because he's an American. And he said, what you folks are doing at the university is what prompted me to come out with this. And I went, right on, Tom. Awesome. So he writes a note on the second edition. He says, I am compelled to add that the continued relevance of this book reflects a far-reaching political, moral, and intellectual failure of the United States to recognize and deal with this takeover of Hawaii. In the book's subtitle, the word annexation has been replaced by the word occupation, referring to America's occupation of Hawaii. Where annexation connotes or means legality by mutual agreement, the act was not mutual and therefore not legal. Since by definition of international law, there was no annexation, we'll then put the word occupation. In making this change, I have embraced the logical conclusion of my research into the events of 1893 to 1898 in Honolulu and Washington. I am prompted to take this step by a growing body of historical work by a new generation of Native Hawaiian scholars. Dr. Keanu writes, and he's citing from my law journal article, the challenge for the fields of political science, history, and law is to distinguish between the rule of law and the politics of power. In the history of Hawaii, Tom says, the might of the United States does not make it right. That's big. Now with the state of Hawaii attacking now, they're trying to come with power. And the only thing you can do is to expose it, right? Expose it, because the thing is, these guys aren't the insurgents. It's like my cousin or my friend. It's like, brother, wake up. And when you're coming, you got war crimes on your back, and you cannot claim you didn't know.
Yes.
And I heard them always say, America will never let us go. Brother, America never had us.
Yes.
This is not about letting it go. Because if we were part of the United States, I would not have been in The Hague in the Netherlands. I would not have been able to have a PhD in this area, to write law journal articles in this area. I'm not getting a group together. I'm just saying, brother, take my class and learn something, because you're going to be liable. We stepped into the shoes of insurgents. We got to fix it. And there's a way to fix it. Chapter 5 of my dissertation gets into how you fix the problem. And then last year, this came up, a part of the education and exposure. Profound. The NEA, the National Education Association, is the largest union of American school teachers and administrators throughout America. And the Hawaii State Teachers Association, that union in Hawaii, is an affiliate member. And they meet every year at a conference. And this is from their website, the Hawaii State Teachers Association, their Facebook, sorry. It says today, which was July 4th, 4th of July, of all days, in Boston, Massachusetts. Today, the National Assembly Association's Representative Assembly, meeting in Boston, approved new business item 37. The NEA will publish an article that documents the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy in 1893, the prolonged illegal occupation of the United States in the Hawaiian Kingdom, and the harmful effects that this occupation has had on the Hawaiian people and resources of the land. That's huge. That was voted on in Boston. That means people are getting educated. Mahalo to Chris Santamaro, she's right here, a teacher at Kaneohe, who introduced the proposal at Uluhane Waialeale, right here, from Kuala Pu'u Charter School in Molokai, whose impassioned and articulate argument in favor of the Hawaiian overthrow measure swayed a majority of teachers from across the country to support it. Now, this person right here is Amy Peruso. She has a PhD in political science. She actually has been teaching about Hawaii's occupation, and she's been using, since 2008, my doctoral dissertation to freshmen in high school, but she would break it down. Now she uses a book, because my doctoral dissertation has now been revised into a textbook called Ua Mau Ke'ela. Okay? So this paper right here that you folks have, it explains this story. Because I called her, I said, hey, first of all, congratulations. Second of all, how the hell did you get that to happen? She said, Keanu, it was actually easier than we thought. People were educated. We were talking the right words. You know, just like how I'm talking to you folks now. It's very logical, right? So she would show them, she would ask them, what are your resources that you use for teaching Hawaii's history? Because all the other ones are wrong. That's brainwashing. And she would introduce them to my book, Ua Mau Ke'ela. And that's the book right here. So I would highly recommend, you know what, go online, go get the book. Go read it, because it's required reading in classes up at UH. It's also the history textbook at Kamehameha Schools, Kapalama. They bought 500 copies. Not bad for an alumnus.
I have a question. Now that it's been a while since the Hawaii State Teachers Association has brought this to the surface. So since there is a new director or head of the Board of Education, is she also educated in this way? And if so, has she started implementing the education on using your text throughout the Hawaii about with the current and correct education?
So in answer to that, no. But the teachers are using it. And a lot of these teachers are coming through UH taking these classes. That's the effect that UH is having, right? So teachers are responsible for what they teach, right? And they are taking it up on their own, and that's what's important. Now, you also have this that came out, February 25th, 2018, United Nations Human Rights Commission. And this was regarding a complaint that was submitted by Ruth Bolome. She's a Hawaiian Swiss. She's actually right here, right? So she filed a complaint with the human rights because she's involved in a court case dealing with two separate land issues. Now, what are you supposed to do with the law of occupation? What is the occupier supposed to do? You must administer the laws of the occupied state. Bottom line, that's governance, right? And all land title transactions must be according to Hawaiian law, not American law, right? That's what we went through. That's Lance Larson's case. That's what this whole thing is all about, right? So let me read to you what this guy said. And he addressed it to two judges, Gary Chang and Judge Castanetti, and all the members of the judiciary. It came from Switzerland, this letter. This is about Ruth's case. It didn't come from Ruth. It came from this guy, Dr. Alfred Desaias, United Nations Independent Expert, Office of High Commissioner of Human Rights. So he says here, as a professor of international law, the former secretary of the United Nations Human Rights Committee, co-author of the book, the United Nations Human Rights Committee Case Law, blah, 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 and currently serving as the UN independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order, I have come to understand, meaning he too had to learn, I have come to understand that the lawful political status of the Hawaiian Islands is that of a sovereign nation state in continuity. The continuity of the Hawaiian Kingdom. But a nation state that is under a strange form of occupation by the United States. Why do they say strange form of occupation? Because they're not administering the laws of the occupied state. They're supposed to. Resulting from an illegal military occupation and a fraudulent annexation. As such, international laws, the Hague and Geneva Conventions, remember the laws of war, require that governance and legal matters within the occupied territory of the Hawaiian Islands must be administered by the application of the laws of the occupied state, in this case, the Hawaiian Kingdom, not the domestic laws of the occupier, the United States. That's huge, and that's macro. Then he basically says, I'm going to skip this. The adjudication of land transactions in the Hawaiian Islands would likewise be a matter of Hawaiian Kingdom law and international law, not U.S. law, because Hawaii is occupied. I reviewed the complaint submitted in 2017 by Madam Ruth Bolome to the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, pointing out historical ongoing of plundering of Hawaiian lands, particularly of those heirs and descendants with land titles that originate from distributions of lands under the authority of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Pursuant to the U.S. Supreme Court judgment in Paquette, Habana, that U.S. Supreme Court case requires that U.S. courts take international law and customary international law into account to property disputes. The state of Hawaii courts should not lend themselves to a flagrant violation of the rights of the landholders and in consequence of pertinent international norms. Therefore, the courts of the state of Hawaii must not enable or collude to the wrongful taking of private lands. That's huge. Now, he's not saying anything new.
Yeah, true.
That's in my dissertation. Actually, it's in the Larson case back in 1999, right? Because what it is facts. It's law. And this guy being an international law professor, he should know the difference between Hawaii being a part of the United States and Hawaii being occupied. Now, this stuff, you folks may have remembered in 1994, Perfect Title started. Anybody remember Perfect Title?
Yes.
I gave you a lecture way back then.
Perfect Title. That was who did. I was the raving lunatic. You know what? I was saying the same thing. I'm saying the same thing now that I said then. Well, they came after us. Who back then? Ooh, we got hit hard. Yeah.
Keanu, I'm reading this and I'm thinking to myself, there are literally thousands of quiet title actions that are directly affected by this. If
We're talking, Keone, every single court case since 1893 to today is void. Not just land titles. Because it goes back to administering Hawaiian Kingdom law. It's called governance. It's the big matter. Going to the land transactions was only referring to Ruth's case. This affects
all of them.
every case. Everything. Because the state of Hawaii is not legal.
Yes.
But there's a way to fix it. That's the whole point. So, remember I told you about Perfect Title? Let's go back and take a look at what it had. 1995. And you know what it says in this article? Perfect Title, focus of criminal probe. For telling the truth, Perfect Title has created chaos in Hawaii's real estate industry with its claims that current land titles are no good. The company reaches those conclusions using 19th century Hawaiian Kingdom law, which it says is still in effect, and by searching property records dating to the 1840s. Wait a minute. Isn't that what the UN guy said? That's what we've been saying from 1995. But we had to get people educated. And education is not here just locally, it's internationally. So I travel a lot internationally to educate people, right? So I like to say I've been pretty consistent when we started this, but the key, again, is education. And this led to a raid on our office in 1997. Yeah. As part of a state criminal investigation, HPD yesterday morning arrested Donald Lewis, David Keanu, and a company secretary for investigation of theft, racketeering, and tax evasion. How's that? Shut them up. Because people are listening. And now they're coming after again. But you know what's different? What we didn't have back then, back then I was just bachelor's degree. I'm a retired captain in Army. Today, different. I got a PhD. I went to The Hague. I got larger articles. All of you are getting educated and knowledgeable. See, now the time is changing. Yeah. So really, your folks' knowledge is my protection.
Yeah.
But yet, my protection is only needed because I'm only sharing with you the truth. That's all it is, right? So, I got 3 more slides. Let's do some comparison. You're going to find this pretty interesting. The Iraqi invasion and occupation of Kuwait, 1990. August 2nd, 1990, Iraq illegally invades Kuwait. 2 days later, the Iraqis installed a puppet government called the Provisional Government. Doesn't that sound familiar? 3 days later, the Provisional Government changes its name to the Republic of Kuwait. What? And And then on August 28, Iraq unilaterally annexes Kuwait as its 19th province and changes the name of the Republic of Kuwait to Kuwait Governorate. Wow, that looks like Hawaii, huh? Okay, let's use Hawaii now. January 16, U.S. illegally invades the Hawaiian Kingdom. January 17, U.S. installs a puppet government called the Provisional Government. July 4, 1894, Provisional Government changes its name to the Republic of Hawaii. July 7, 1898, United States unilaterally annexes Hawaii as its territory and changes the name of the Republic to the Territory of Hawaii. What? This is, wait. Did you know Saddam Hussein actually said something along these lines back then? He said, I'll get out of Kuwait when you get out of Hawaii. Now I'm going back to this. I'm like, wow, did he know our history before we even knew our own? That was 1990, right?
Margaret Thatcher said the same thing in the movie Margaret Thatcher.
Did she?
Really?
In the movie that was done with Meryl Streep portraying Margaret Thatcher.
And what would they say?
The thing that happened was the United States told the Senate representative to Margaret Thatcher that said, get out of the Falkland Islands.
Oh.
She said, the day you get out of Hawaii.
Interesting.
And I stood up on my class and that day.
I gotta see that. I gotta pull that up for class. That's a class instrument we can use. Okay, so now let's take a look at reparations, because we've been occupied for a long time. Is there something that we can kind of see that makes this real? Which is why the U.S. did a full court press starting in January to try to put a halt to this, because it boils down to money. This whole thing is money, because liability. So after the Iraq's 7 months of illegal occupying Kuwait, from August 3rd, 1990 to February 23rd, I think, of 1991, I should have put that in. The United Nations Compensation Commission was established by the UN Security Council, led by the United States. In 2014, Iraq paid, through the United Nations Compensation Commission, paid $52.4 billion for 7 months of an illegal occupation. Wow. That's how much they paid. The 7 months of occupation, equaled to 207 days for a total of $254 million per day. Okay, that's kind of a gauge, right? Okay, let's apply that to Hawaii. Applied to the occupation of the Hawaiian Kingdom, we have 45,801 days of occupation, 125 years, would amount to $11.6 trillion. This is real. This is what happens when you deal with an independent state and you have international law. This is not about colonization, indigenous rights. This is about occupation, denationalization, and war crimes. And this thing has to be fixed. Game over already. That's how it works. So, to end this talk, I want to go back to what happened in 1893. This is the Royal Hawaiian Band, part of the Hawaiian government. They were told in January, if you don't sign an oath of allegiance, you lose your job. Pretty much half the band chose not to sign the oath, and by February, they lost their jobs. Now imagine you have a family. They lost it, they got gone, right? This was the oath of allegiance that they were forced to sign. And this was signed by Joseph Puni, native Hawaiian from Waihe'e, Maui, who was a detective in Honolulu. Remember I told you it's the same government, they just changing names, right? I do solemnly swear and affirm in the presence of Almighty God that I will support the Constitution, laws, and government of the Republic of Hawaii, and will not either directly or indirectly encourage or assist in the restoration of the establishment of a monarchical form of government in the Hawaiian Islands. Signed, Joseph Puni. It was the same thing said to the provisional government. Yeah. And pretty much, I guess, the ones who took the oath today are coming after me, because they're not in support of establishing a monarchical form of government. What already happened? This is 1995. Because I really am a government official. It's just I don't get paid. I got to work for it. So I got to teach classes. People hire me as a consultant. See, that's how I do stuff. See, I don't borrow money from OHA. I don't get not loans, but grants, right? Because that's a IRS tax write-off. Really hard. You got to get creative to play this game, you know. But I got to be clean because I live in a glass house, even with the attacks. So people ask me, well, why do I do what I do? Right? Well, what I want to play for you is Maile Aloha Aina, composed for those in the Royal Hawaiian Band who refused to sign the Oath of Allegiance. And it was composed by Mrs. Prendergast, a lady in waiting with Queen Lili Okalai. And I like this song because it's also in English. Yeah? A lot of times you only hear the native verses. Here, this is, I believe, Cyrus Green and his version.
Famous are the children of Hawaii. Ever loyal to the land. When the uncaring messenger comes, with his greedy document of extortion. From the Big Island, Alii answers. Help also comes from the Ilani. Ano's Kauai lends support. So do the sands of Kapu Kapa. Write his name on the paper of the enemy. With its sin of annexation and the sale of native civil rights. Value the government's sums of money. We are satisfied with our stones, the astonishing food of the land. Who has won the rights of the land. And now we tell the story again of the people who love their land. We will not rest until we have our lands.
So that song hasn't changed. and it's still relevant today. Because what you folks have gone through is I took you back into time, into going back to them and how they stood and where it still exists today. And to me, that's what drives me. And that's the connection I got to my kupuna. I can't stop doing this. So the only thing that I can ask that any of you folks do, support your past, know your past, and say something when something's wrong, right? That's how it's supposed to work. With that, I know we went over some time. I can only have like maybe 5 minutes of questions because we're supposed to have finished at 7. Are you guys okay that we went over? Or should I say Ihilani? Is it okay I went over? From Yolani Palace. They're the ones who set it up. Are there any questions? I'm going to take a couple questions. Yes.
In December or early January, in the blog, they were mentioning about some conflict of interest on conditioning. Can you expand on that?
No, there was no conflict of interest. Well, there was a conflict of interest with the prospective commissioner, but not the 3 that were selected. Yeah. Because you have to go through the process of vetting to get the right commissioner. So we actually completed the task. There's 3 commissioners. And right now everything is just holding off, right, until this administration can do what they're supposed to do at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. That's really all it's at. Yes.
Pleasure to meet you, and thank you personally for the decades of effort sticking with the truth. I personally questioned the state 4 years ago. They financially destroyed me. And when I asked them if it was jurisdiction, I was yet to this date done that. I've been jailed multiple times. The last time I was jailed and never got the judge is now challenged all the judges. What is our remedy? I noticed that in my readings that you've gone to the ICC and made the state of Hawaii a participant in that.
So the remedy, the question is, what are the remedies for us? Well, a lot of what we thought we knew gets changed with what we now know. You cannot go by what you thought you knew by using it. You have to get fully immersed into what it is. And what is the law of occupation? What are my rights as a protected person defined under the Geneva Convention? These are football terms and football theories, to use that metaphor. So it takes a while to know this stuff. But it's not something that's going to be fixed at this level because the state has already taken a position to attack. And once they've taken that position, these individuals cannot claim they didn't know, and that fulfills the element of the war crime of awareness. Now they're operating on politics of power, and actually you got some judges actually saying, one in fact today said, if I grant this motion to dismiss, and I agree that there's a defect in title, actually said, if I agree that there's a defect in title, referring to this document, if I agree that there's a defect in title, I'm saying I'm recognizing the Hawaiian Kingdom. Not going to do that. Now, to have a judge say that, that's not a judge. That's a guy making an opinion who just created a victim out of his arrogance. What he should have said was, let me address this. Let's see what the evidence is by letting the prosecution or the plaintiff provide rebuttable evidence, and then we'll take it from there. Don't just arbitrarily come out and say, no. That actually serves as evidence. Now, every time I go in and I'm talking to people, even law enforcement, I'm not trying to tell them don't do their job, because this place will be thrown into chaos. I'm just saying, in order to do your job, comply with the law of occupation. Administer Hawaiian Kingdom law. Now, the acting government came out with a resolution, a proclamation, on Hawaiian Kingdom law. Because if they administer today Hawaiian Kingdom law from 1893, this place is going to blow up. Because right now, we're not operating on Hawaiian Kingdom law in 1893. We're operating on illegal laws that have been imposed ever since. So what the acting government did, because they could do it by decree, that's authorized, right? That a proclamation was made in 2014 that all laws illegally imposed in Hawaii since 1887, the bayonet, till today, will be the provisional laws of the occupied state, so long as these laws do not run contrary to the letter, spirit, and intent of Hawaiian Kingdom law. See, that's how you deal with driver's licenses now. See, now we can bring it to date. But as far as IRS taxes, that goes against Hawaiian Kingdom law. That doesn't apply. State of Hawaii taxes, guess what? Now it's legal. Because we still need to pay the police department, the teachers, me at UH teaching, right? But we just fixed the pillaging going into law. But that's what my job is to provide a solution. I'm not here to argue with people. Past that. I'm here to expose, educate, but also comply. And I'm going to hold people accountable. This one, and then back there. Yes.
The letter that was from the expert.
Right here. And you guys have a copy of it.
Now, I read this a few weeks ago, right after the blog came out. And it went to Judge Castanetti, Jeanette Castanetti, and Chang. Why was it sent to them, and what response are they giving? Or?
Okay, if you look at this letter is not asking for a response.
Okay.
It's saying you have to follow the laws of occupation. But this letter was also addressed to President Trump, Rex Tillerson, and the Attorney General, Douglas Chin, as well as the judiciary. And I was able to get postage receipts from Geneva that verified that, and when they got it. This coming from an expert at the United Nations Human Rights Commission. Their job is, this is actually supposed to be confidential. They're not supposed to make it public. Ms. Bolome just got it because it was her complaint. The role of an independent expert is to communicate with the states to try to address human rights violations. That's what it is. And you normally have letters from experts and special rapporteurs, that's another term, where they pose the position taken and say, can you respond on this particular issue? This is not that. And I've seen his letters before. This is not that. This is dictating something. This is not asking for an opinion to respond. Because if you take a look at the Larson case from 1999, too late to respond. You should have been correcting this since the Larson case, if anything. So what you have since then, when people now know, are violations. The next step is who's accountable. Now, I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm just saying that these are the issues at stake. In fact, that's what the Fact-Finding Commission of Inquiry was going to be getting into. You know that Judge Sandra Schutte, she passed away, but who in that chain of command is going to be liable for putting Lance Larson through an unfair trial and unlawfully confining him, because that's the war crime? This Commission of Inquiry was going to determine that. That's the grand jury. That applies to everybody in Hawaii. And that is going to strike fear in a lot of people, which I can understand why the response. Just like perfect title. But everything that I shared with you, I'm up front. You know, I talk straight. I don't beat around the bush. And I took the effort to ensure that this information would be critiqued and institutionalized through the academic arena. And I now teach that. So how can I now be accused of so many wrong stuff that is absolutely crazy? And in these pleadings that we're dealing with these guys, his name is James Evers from the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs. He was trying to say that we're committing felonies because we're arguing in court with Dexter Kayama in a motion to dismiss that the court doesn't have jurisdiction. But they haven't refuted any evidence, they just rule against it. He's saying that because they're ruling against it, you're committing fraud. Wait a minute. We're not committing fraud, we're setting you up for war crimes. That's what we're doing. And that's where it's going. So that case that was in the court, the circuit court, was removed to the federal court. So right now it's in the federal court in Honolulu because it deals with sovereign immunity. Remember, I'm a government official, right? Even though you don't believe it, I actually still am. You know, because I am. I was in The Hague, right? Now we're getting into the real issues. My agreement and discussion with the U.S. State Department. My meetings with the Cuban Embassy in The Hague. My meeting with the Universal Postal Union in Geneva, with Rwanda. You telling me that's not true? And when we put that all on the record, this guy Evers is just attacking my name. Just completely disregarding everything. I'm like, wow, so this is good. Keep talking, bro. Keep writing it. Because that is giving me an unfair trial. And you are attacking my credibility. without warrant. So all these things are real. I was just basically telling him, brother, stand down. But I guess he got word from the United States. Keep attacking. So with all of you folks here, and all the people that I teach in class, I'm not asking you to defend me. I'm just saying, when you see somebody getting hurt, say something. I just don't sit there and let it happen because I'm afraid, right? Because right now we're educated, you know, and that's what it's all about. And it comes to a point where you just can say, stop it already. Stop. Because you know, these guys are all in our families, right? Looks like the Democratic Party taking over. Well, brother, you guys in the wrong shoes. Take it easy. So I still have a sense of humor, because you go crazy with this stuff. I have a sense of humor because I see the end game. Last question. Yes.
By the way, I have to say this. The whole system is fraudulent.
It's illegal. It is.
The whole system's illegal. So any one of these lawyers that are perpetuating it are treasonous. They need to stop, cease immediately. But the thing I wanted to say was, Miss Dawn Watson, before she passed away,
She died.
called me one morning, at like 3 o'clock in the morning, to ask for my position on what if I was to turn over 3,000 acres to Keanu Sai for him to have his land base.
Don't worry. No. Because it's all illegal anyway. No, because remember today, even we don't own land.
Yeah.
The ones who own it are from 1893. That's called my great-grandfather. I can't even claim it's mine because the system that will allow it to be mine is one of the requirements is I got to follow Hawaiian Kingdom law to be an heir if it's interstate, right? Obviously, I didn't. I was in the Army. I didn't know. So the only thing that what I could say for people to support, because I know Don, what I could say to support, get educated. Just when I see you go, hey, what's up, yo? Hey, what's up? You know, start to own it, right? When you own this information is when you take responsibility for it. Some people keep their hands at an arm's length, like, Keanu's talking to, I know he's right, but I don't want to kind of get there. I'm not saying join my group. I don't have a group. I never did have a group. I just got a family, and I can guarantee you, in my family, I got 2 sons and my wife and my mom and dad, right, and my sister. But I have friends. But right now I have colleagues as well. And at the University of Hawaii, people teach this, and I encourage that at every level, high school, everybody. Because the key here is education. Because you know what? Right now we are not even ready to take over. Nobody even knows what is Hawaiian Kingdom law. Right? They say certain words. It doesn't mean they even understand what it is.
Where can we get the 770 pages of kingdom law?
Yeah, if you go to HawaiianKingdom.org, check out statutory laws. Constitution and statutory laws. It's a reprint of the Civil Code and the Penal Code. And it's good. But remember, the laws are one thing. The knowledge of the laws, how to apply it. Because what we tend to do is we're looking at Hawaiian law with an American lens. That's the problem. That's a Republican view. You're supposed to be looking at Hawaiian law from a constitutional monarchy lens. And that is infused with Alii, Konahiki, native tenant rights, piscary rights, civil rights. Those are very different. And that's what we have to be mindful of. So that's why I'm saying, don't do anything yet until you can understand what you're actually doing. I would recommend go order the book online. You guys.
It's also available in the Palace Shop.
Yeah.
Palace Shop, perfect. I love it. Go and get that book, and you know what I would recommend? You know your family. Stop talking. Take a section out of that book, read it, and have a discussion. Make it like Bible studies.
Yes.
That's all it is. And you know, critique it. Because in the book, you have a glossary. I would also recommend bring a dictionary. So when somebody says, hey, Papa, what's sovereignty? What should Papa tell the daughter, the granddaughter? Look it up. Don't make it up. See, everybody pull a dictionary out and let's look up what is sovereign. That's not what I thought it was. So that is what I would recommend because, you know, the state of war that I'm presenting, although it may have been attractive, the term, kind of enticing, like, hey, what is this guy going to talk about? This is for real. Now this affects a lot of our own men and women in the U.S. military right now.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa. But you know what? I got to say, good training. I told my son, hey, join the National Guard, because the 487 Field Artillery is actually from the King's Guard. Remember the name changes? So if you're in the system, get educated, use it.
Change of that.
Exactly. So we part of transition. So, you know, going back to attorneys, okay, attorneys need to understand what is the law to get ready for a transition. Judges, they got to understand what is the law to get ready for a transition. Police department, you got to understand what is the law to get ready for the transition. That's how it's supposed to work. We're in the transitional phase. We are basically, our national consciousness is not obliterated anymore. It's growing. And we're now starting to ask the right questions, which is the key. And with that, I want to mahalo everybody for listening, and go online. It's going to be up in about a month. Mahalo nui.